Welcome to the June regular meeting of the Calgary Police Commission. I would like to call this meeting to order and ask that everyone ensure your microphones are muted until you need to speak. My name is Sean Cornett and I am Chair of the Commission. I'm joined today by Commissioners Amtul Siddiqui, Marilyn North Pagan, Susan Mallon, Kim Lynch-Proctor, Heather Campbell, Teresa Rosell, TJ Tsang, Jeff French, Cherie Nyson-Jordan, Ayo Adidran, Kelly Ogle, Robert Tangay, and Councillors Jennifer Wyness and Raj Dhaliwal. As always, today's Calgary Police Service representatives are led by Chief Constable Mark Neufeld. Chief, could you please introduce those you expect to speak today at today's meeting?
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Superintendent Claire Smart, Chief Neufeld's Executive Officer. I'd like to introduce today Deputy Paul Cook, Bureau of Investigative Support, Deputy Katie McClellan, Bureau of Service and Community Support, Deputy Raj Gill, Bureau of People and Organizational Development, and Acting Deputy Joe Brar for Deputy Tofik, Bureau and Community Policing. Our presenters today for the World Petroleum Congress update will be Acting Superintendent Sheldon Scott, Staff Sergeant Shane Joyce, Sergeant Zane Kelly, and Strategist Jason Archibald. For the Calgary Stampede update, it will be Acting Inspector JF Derry, and presenters for the hate crime presentation will be Constable Matt Messenger. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today. For those not familiar with our role, our commission is a body of 13 community members and 2 city councillors appointed by City Council and the Government of Alberta. We provide independent citizen governance and oversight of the Calgary Police Service on behalf of all Calgarians. To protect the political neutrality of the police, Alberta's Police Act requires that the police chief report directly to us instead of elected officials. We provide direction to the police through the chief, police policies, monitoring of the police complaint process, and approval of how the police budget is spent. Today is one of 8 regular meetings we have each year to openly discuss police governance and oversight matters with the service's leadership and to hear from the public. We also have several private monthly committee meetings where commissioners work more directly with the service on various matters that cannot be discussed publicly. Our commission is meeting today on the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi, made up of Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Arahe Nakota, comprised of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. These are the people who made a treaty with the Crown, forming Treaty 7 territory. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. We are committed to doing our part to address the inequity and intergenerational trauma caused by past and current wrongs, to support reconciliation with all Indigenous people who share this land with us. Our commission also condemns racism and prejudice in all forms and is committed to being anti-racist. We stand in solidarity with all Calgarians who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. For those of you joining us for the first time, allow me to provide a brief overview of the meeting format. The public session of this meeting is being live streamed, and a recording will be posted online so we can make it available to those unable to attend. There will be several presentations from the Calgary Police Service, commission members, and commission staff. Commissioners will have the chance to ask questions or make comments after each one. Once we've completed the presentations, we'll move to the public participation portion of the meeting. Those who are registered to speak will then be called on by name and will have a chance to either ask a question or make a presentation for consideration. Following the public participation, we will close the public portion of the meeting with the chief and I taking questions from media. Everyone is welcome to observe the media availability, but only media can participate. To start our agenda items, I will now call for declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest from the commissioners. Hearing and seeing no declarations, I will now ask for approval of the agenda. Does any member of the commission wish to request an amendment to the agenda? Seeing and hearing no requests, I will now ask for approval of the consent agenda. For those viewing today's meeting, the consent agenda is a list of routine items and reports that all commissioners agree can be accepted without more discussion or a separate vote. Does any member of the commission wish to request an item on the consent agenda be brought forward for discussion? Hearing and seeing none, I declare both the agenda and consent agenda approved as presented. I would like to start my chair's report by acknowledging that June is a month where we celebrate several communities that are part of our city. Yesterday was Canadian Multicultural Day, a celebration of the cultural diversity that makes our country such a vibrant place to live. Today also marks the beginning of Eid al-Adha for Calgary's Muslim community. On behalf of our commissioners, Eid al-Adha Mubarak to all celebrating. We also marked Elder Abuse Awareness Day, which is a time to remind ourselves of the signs of elder abuse so that we can help look out for those who are vulnerable to financial, psychological, emotional, or sexual abuse, or to neglect and abandonment due to age. The Calgary Police Service's Elder Abuse Response Team works closely with partners like the Kirby Centre and Caria Calgary to address and prevent elder abuse, and we are grateful for their work. While Calgary's Pride Festival isn't till the fall, June is also Pride Month. Our commission joins with gender and sexually diverse Calgarians in celebrating the progress made towards equality while still recognizing there is so much more work left to do. Our commission also participated in a ceremony to mark the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Immigration Act. The impact of this discriminatory law has been felt by generations of Chinese Canadians, and remembering it is an important step in ensuring history does not repeat itself. Finally, June also marked the summer solstice, National Indigenous Peoples Day, and Aboriginal Awareness Week in Calgary. We were honored to be invited to participate in the annual powwow to mark the end of these celebrations and enjoyed seeing all the traditional Indigenous culture on full display. Outside of June's cultural celebrations, several commissioners and staff members attended the annual Alberta Association of Police Governance Conference, where we collaborated and learned with police commissions and committees from across the province. We also presented our commission's annual report to City Council, which was our sixth council presentation this spring. We are grateful to Council for their ongoing support and engagement around policing and police governance. The only other major highlight for us is that our staff team have finally moved to a new office that will better meet our needs as we serve Calgarians. They're still working on the technology in the new space, which is why we're meeting virtually today, but we'll be able to meet in the new space come September. As usual, I would also like to take a quick moment to acknowledge some of the many ways members of the Calgary Police Service have gone above and beyond to deliver on the priorities of Calgarians. The service's work to stop gun violence has been showing success, with shootings being down by 31% over last year. In one example of how the service is addressing this crime, Project Reproduction saw investigators work with partners across Canada to stop a group using 3D printers to produce firearms in Calgary. The service's leadership in this area was also recently recognized as Acting Sergeant Lynch from the Firearms Investigative Team was recognized by the U.S. Department of Justice for his work developing firearms tracing program in Calgary. Thank you to all the members working around the clock to get firearms off our streets and hold people accountable when shootings occur. Your work is making a difference. On the front line, officers have continued working to improve safety on transit and in public spaces downtown. In total, over 5,000 criminal charges have been laid by officers proactively patrolling these areas between January and June 2023. While progress is being made, officers unfortunately still had to quickly respond to several high-profile incidents on transit, including a man threatening people with a hatchet and a sexual assault. We are grateful for the professionalism of those who responded to these incidents that resulted in charges being quickly laid. Our commission would also like to congratulate a civilian employee who was recognized for her leadership by the City of Calgary. Tamara Daku, manager of the Bureau of Community Policing's Analytical Unit, received a One Calgary Award, recognizing her for her outstanding contributions to our city. The work her team does is critical as it helps the service identify crime trends and link offenses to potential identifying crime trends and link offenses to potential suspects. We are grateful to her and her team for what they do. I know there are many other ways that members of the Calgary Police Service have delivered for Calgarians over this past month. On behalf of Calgarians and the Commission, thank you for all that you do. With that, I'll conclude my chair's report, and we'll now move on to our first presentation. We are pleased to be joined today by Matthew Block, the Assistant Executive Director of the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team. Our Commission has a role in monitoring the police conduct complaint process. We review decisions to relieve officers without pay, approve time limit extensions when timeline requirements under the Police Act cannot be met, and hear appeals on complaints about CPS policy or services provided. A big focus of our work around complaints has been trying to reduce the time it takes to investigate and address police conduct concerns. Additional resources and process changes have helped to significantly reduce the average time these investigations take, and we hope to reduce it even further. One partner in this work is ASIRT, as they are tasked with investigating serious police incidents to determine if any criminal offenses have occurred. We invited Mr. Block to join us today to share a bit about their role, how they conduct investigations, and what they're doing to support police oversight in Alberta. Mr. Block, if you could please go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I have a short presentation here for all of you. I'm just going to quickly go through a bit of what ASIRT is, with lots of time for questions at the end. So what I'm going to take you through is essentially who we are, what we do, what we've done in the past, and a little bit on the future of ASIRT. So ASIRT is created under statute. It's created under the Police Act. We work solely at the direction of the Director of Law Enforcement. There are a lot of similar organizations like ASIRT across the country. Some of them work in a similar model to this, others don't, others work at their own direction. But essentially what that means is that ASIRT doesn't decide which files it takes on. The Director of Law Enforcement decides which files we take on. Our basic role is that we investigate police officers. Generally speaking, at this time, we don't investigate peace officers, although that does happen occasionally if the Director of Law Enforcement directs us to. This includes both on-duty and off-duty police officers. And what we're looking at is two basic categories. First being serious injury or death, and the second being a matter of a serious or sensitive nature. ASIRT is a civilian-led organization. The executive director is Michael Ewenson, who's a former Crown prosecutor, and then I'm the assistant executive director, also a former Crown prosecutor. We have one other lawyer, so there's three lawyers on the legal side at ASIRT, and then we have our investigative teams. These teams are made up of two types of investigators. There's seconded police officers, so police officers who are still members of EPS, CPS, and other police agencies who have come over to ASIRT for a few years. And then there's also Government of Alberta investigators. So these are employees that we've hired, and they are, generally speaking, although not exclusively, former police officers. The the total makeup of ASIRT is we have 24 full-time investigators and then 2 wage investigators. And then we have a small amount of admin staff. So we've got 6 information administrators and 3 admin. One of our investigators is also an Indigenous liaison. So he's both the liaison and an investigator on our team. Next, looking at ASIRT's investigations and how we work. So, as I mentioned, we're directed by the Director of Law Enforcement. So when there's an incident where there's a serious injury or death, at this point, the police agency makes what we call a 46-1 notification to the Director of Law Enforcement. They tell the Director of Law Enforcement what happened, and the Director of Law Enforcement then makes a decision. First, he decides, is this in scope or out of scope? And what that just means is, does this fall within those mandates, being a serious injury or death, or otherwise a serious or sensitive incident? If he determines that it's inside the scope, then it's his decision to either direct that ASIRT investigates or send it back to the home police agency for them to investigate. There are a few other things that the DLE can do, but those are the most common. Next, if the file is sent to ASIRT, there's a number of different things that we do. The most common now is just a full-on investigation where we are going out and investigating all of the aspects of the file. Another type is called a review, which is where the home agency would conduct an investigation, send it to ASIRT, and we would then review it and send our comments and any suggestions we have for improving the investigation back to the home agency. Oversee is the third kind, and that's essentially the home agency is investigating, but there's some ASIRT investigators involved there that are, I guess, directing the progress of the investigation. And finally, there's an assist, which is a different type of investigation where we're providing some other sort of assistance. Now, these terms, obviously, that bring files to ASIRT are fairly amorphous, serious or sensitive incidents. They're not defined in the statute. So these can include a wide range of incidents. They can include sexual assaults, corruption files, or lesser injuries, lesser than the threshold of a serious injury, if there are sensitive aspects. We also, the one exception to files getting to ASIRT like this is what we call a 46-2, which is if ASIRT's already investigating something and finds evidence of a second offense or offenses, we can self-direct to investigate those. So once ASIRT gets that call from the Director of Law Enforcement that we are to investigate a matter, we send out a team of investigators. The teams will go out throughout the entire province. We have offices in Edmonton and Calgary. So we will send out a number of investigators to the scene or the city as required by the investigation. We do use the police agencies throughout the province for assistance. ASIRT, while we have a number of expertise in different areas, doesn't have necessarily enough resources to have forensic units and enough officers for scene containment and so on. So we rely on other agencies for those as required. And I guess the most important aspect to understand about an ASIRT investigation is that it is fundamentally a criminal investigation. It's It's not a professional standards investigation. It will never roll into a professional standards investigation. What we do from time to time, should we find it useful, is we will make some small suggestions in our final reports on training or policy, but we never go into an investigation that's not a true criminal investigation. So what this means, of course, is that like anyone who's the subject of a criminal investigation, the police officers that we are investigating have full rights under the charter. The most important one, the one that we see come up the most, is, of course, they have the right to silence. Police officers don't have to, or rather, police officers that are the subject officers don't have to speak to ASIRT. If an officer is just a witness officer, they do have to speak to ASIRT, but according to the charter, as the subject of a criminal investigation, a subject officer does not have to. So in terms of our then public role, once we've started a file, generally within 2 to 3 business days later, we will issue a news release. This is our way of sort of giving as many facts as we can to the public so that they understand what is going on. We do have to hold back a lot of things from these initial news releases because it would harm the investigation, of course, if we were to release all the details right at the beginning of the investigation. So we try to provide as much as possible. And one of the things that has been a great help in terms of providing more details to the public in these initial news releases is the body-worn cameras that we see in Calgary. So our investigation then will continue as long as it takes, and the investigative team will put together an investigative report. The report just includes all the facts that those investigators have found and doesn't have any conclusions. And this is an important part of the ASIRT model because those investigators, as I mentioned previously, are almost exclusively current or former police officers. They therefore, so that there's no appearance of bias, have no role in the final conclusions. The investigative report then, once complete, goes to the executive director or myself, the assistant executive director. And it's at this time that we look at whether or not there are reasonable grounds to support a criminal charge in this investigation. If we then come to that opinion that there are reasonable grounds to support a criminal charge, we send it to the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service for a charge opinion. And this is required under the Police Act that we send it to the Attorney General's office. If in a circumstance where either internally we found that there are no reasonable grounds or the Crown Prosecution Service has determined that there should be no charges, then ASIRT writes a public decision. It's a report that's posted on our website and referenced in a news release. If there are charges, ASIRT then issues a short news release, and it's at this stage then that the charged officer would be named. So now some of the past ASIRT investigations. So looking back over the last, this chart has the last 7 years. Previous to that, so ASIRT starting in 2019 was at a level of roughly about 30 files per year and gradually started to increase in about 2013 into the 40s and 50s. ASIRT then, as you can see on this graph, started to see 70 or 80 files per year quite frequently. There were not additional resources given to ASIRT during this time. And as come as no surprise, with there being more files and no new resources, ASIRT started to develop a backlog of files, and that would be at the executive director level. So we have these completed investigations that we're waiting for decisions by the executive director. Now, this has shifted somewhat in the last few years, and I'll speak a bit about the future in the end, but you can see that fortunately now the file numbers are dropping somewhat, which is allowing ASIRT to work on that backlog. Specifically, Calgary police files. Here's over the last 7 years, you can see the number of investigations that ASIRT has had into Calgary police officers. And at the end there, you can see right now we have 3 so far this year. Next, as I mentioned, ASIRT sees a number of different types of files. In this graph is now showing since 2015, sort of the breakdown of the files that we do. And you can see in the dark blue, those are the fatality files. So those would be, for example, an officer-involved shooting where there's a death. Those would be deaths in cells and other similar files. Serious injury files are in the purple, and sensitive files in the green, and the minimal assist files in the, I guess, yellowish green. So there is obviously one thing that stands out from this chart is that we are seeing more sensitive files over time as a proportion of our overall case makeup. And this chart sort of brings that point home. So the large green area shows that 46% of our files from 2015 to 2022 have been those sensitive files. And the other roughly half split between fatality and serious injury files. So now just a few words on sort of where ASIRT's going. So early in 2022, we saw a significant budget increase, roughly a 35% budget increase. And that has had a real positive effect on our ability to clear out those files and investigate files better. At this point, we've seen 24 files so far, so we're on track for a year that would be a number of files that we haven't seen since roughly 2013 or 2014, which is allowing ASIRT again to clear out some of that backlog. So at this point, the number of files that we've closed versus the number of files that have come in, that net number is higher than it's ever been in the entire history of ASIRT. Which isn't to say that we don't have a serious backlog to still work through, and it will take some time to work through that backlog, but at least now things are moving in the right direction. We certainly recognize the pressures that the backlog puts on everyone involved, from the affected people to the police officers, to citizens as a whole, and we are working hard to try and reduce that backlog. So that is all I have for my slideshow, and then I have time for questions.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for being here today, Mr. Block. And for questions, I'll start by turning it over to the commissioners. Commissioner Rossell, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful to understand, and we really appreciate you coming to talk to us today. You talked a little bit about the budget increase and clearing the backlog, and obviously having such a large backlog has a huge impact on police officers and on the public and on public perception of police. Can you talk a little bit more about, how big the backlog is, and kind of, you probably have some estimates in the background of how long it's going to take to work through that now with your increased budget?
Right. So I can tell you how many open files we have right now, which is not quite the same as what the backlog is, since many investigations take some time just to investigate, and that's not quite the backlog. But in terms of open files right now, we have approximately 200 open files. And so, a substantial percentage of that is just those ones that are still under investigation. and then a number of them are ones that are sitting in the backlog. In terms of how long it will take us to clear it, I don't think we have an exact estimate of that. It's very difficult to determine, as each file, some files can take a matter of days, some can take a matter of weeks. So it's still something that we are exactly figuring out in terms of timeline. But when Mike Ewenson started his term, which was at the beginning of 2022, I believe his plan was to have the backlog cut in half by the end of his 3-year term. So we're in the territory of years.
That's very helpful to understand. Thank you.
Commissioner Lynch Proctor.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks again for joining us today and for that presentation. And good to see you again. I just wanted to touch on a little bit on resourcing as well, so we better understand that and thinking about it a little bit differently. Can you comment on the file closure rate in Alberta in terms of months, what our historical average file closure rate would be, and how that might compare to other jurisdictions? And I'm asking this just to get a sense of resourcing currently. And then related to that, how you think body-worn camera is going to impact your efficiency and ability to close files going forward. And I don't want to overburden this question, but just thinking about too the impact of protracted timelines on affected parties being not only the complainant citizens and impacted police officers, but wonder if we could touch on too how you keep those parties up to date other than a news release and then publishing a decision. And sorry, I know that was sort of a multi-pronged question, so let me know if you want me to repeat any of it.
Okay. Yeah, I think I have that. Okay, so first on the timelines and what our sort of average is to completion. We don't have an exact stat on that, and that's because we don't do them in chronological order necessarily anymore. We're partially because of the size of the backlog, we are taking an approach of looking at files and determining looking at all the factors that should say this file should be closed first as opposed to other ones. There's obviously a priority given to files where we see that this is something that is going to go to criminal charges. So that's always a very high priority. We get regular contact from the affected people or subject officers and so on, so that we change sometimes the order that these are being closed in. So that's why I don't have an average time to close, but I guess I can tell you that we've closed files recently that were from this year, some that were from 2022, but we also are closing a number of files that are from early 2019 right now. And that's sort of the back end of the backlog. And then, from there, we're picking sort of other bits and pieces. In terms of other jurisdictions and their timelines, it really varies. There are, I believe it's Ontario has a requirement that they at least report when they haven't reached a timeline. And I can't recall what that is off the top of my head, but it's something in the range of 6 months to a year. It's relatively short. Not necessarily that it's always done then, but that they're reporting. The other jurisdictions have different mandates than ASIRT, though. ASIRT has a very broad mandate compared to other ones, and it's mainly that serious and sensitive mandate that we have, whereas other jurisdictions often will be doing just these serious injury type offenses. So we can be busy in a different way than other agencies. There's quite a range. We speak to other agencies, the IAO in BC, IIU in Manitoba and SIU in Ontario. Generally speaking, the BC and Ontario ones are doing better in terms of their backlog, but there are stresses on all of the agencies across the country. Next, I think you had asked about body-worn camera. Body-worn camera can be a huge, huge help for us. It's the files are much easier to get through quickly when there's body-worn camera. It applies at every stage. Like I mentioned earlier, when we have body-worn camera at that initial news release stage, it allows us to provide a lot more information, which I think is very good for public confidence. But also, you know, there's nothing like being able to see what actually happened. It's extremely valuable for all of our investigations. In terms of, I think your final question was about updating the parties involved. So that's sort of done on a case-by-case basis. There isn't necessarily a formula that we apply, and there's a number of different reasons for that. It depends on how much people want to be informed on some. And then if there's when it comes to the subject officer, often there just isn't a lot we can provide to them. So we will provide them updates if they're asking for it, but there's not a lot we can provide because, of course, pretty much anything we told them about where we're going through the process would probably be a hint about where it's going. And we have to preserve the integrity of the investigation, so we can't really tell them a lot about it. But it is something that we're trying to improve on and have more information passed along to everyone to at least try to reduce the stress. Did I catch all of your questions, Commissioner?
You did. You did an amazing job. Thank you. I could probably ask you 5 more questions, but I'm not going to. Thanks so much for attending today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go along to Commissioner Siddiqui, please.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question is around officers who don't testify during an investigation. I was just curious if you're able to share sort of the implications of that, of what happens and what happens with the timeline, and just an idea of, do you have a percentage of the amount of officers who do not testify when they're being charged with an ASIRT investigation?
Just to clarify, Commissioner, do you mean are they providing a statement to our investigators, or if they are charged and they do or don't testify at trial?
The latter. So it's not a witness, it's more they're charged and they choose not to.
We don't have stats on that. I'm just trying to think through the trials that we've seen. It's pretty common if there is a charge and this actually makes it to trial, especially in a use of force incident, that the officer will have to testify. And that is just because how these matters work essentially is, so what the officer is doing is declaring that they have a defense. The defense is under Section 25 of the Criminal Code usually, that they were authorized or required to use this force by virtue of their position. Most defenses require some positive evidence on behalf of the person bringing it forward. That's not always the case. It is possible that they won't have to, but for use of force, generally speaking, they will testify. But once it gets to trial, these are like all trials. All things happen. Some testify, some don't. Some are able to bring evidence in other ways. It's anything happens.
Sorry, and I think I need to go back and clarify, because I think I chose the latter and I should have chose the former. So my question is, if they choose not to make a statement during the investigation, sorry. Okay. I have an accounting degree, not a law degree, so sorry about that.
That's quite all right. That one I could definitely answer. So it's we see quite a. I don't have a stat again on how many exactly are providing statements for the subject officers during the investigations. It varies a bit by agency. and by who their lawyer is. Lawyers give different advice on that. But you know, again, this is their right under the charter to not provide a statement. There's sort of a tie-in, I suppose, to the answer that I gave to the question that you didn't intend to ask, is that, again, to have a defense fully fleshed out, often it requires some subjective evidence from a police officer. So if they're not giving that, then it may be more likely that they're charged. But you know, these it really varies by the type of file. This isn't something where we see 1% of police officers providing statements or anything like that. We do still see quite a few police officers providing statements, and you know, they're useful, because when it comes to something like an officer-involved shooting, those are situations where I haven't been in. You know, of course, you haven't been in or anything like that. There are a lot of subjective beliefs that really come in to that decision. So it's very helpful for us when police officers do decide to provide a statement.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Dyson-Jordan.
Thank you. And thank you also for the presentation. I just wanted to kind of follow along on the budget issue. So there's been remarkable improvement in your file closure rate, especially in the last year and a half. Still striving for better, and I'm sure, but have you got some understanding of the implications to both your scope and your budget related to the changes in the Police Act?
We don't have a lot of information on that at this point. It's our understanding that if our scope is increased, that there will be increases in our budget to cover that as well. The talks, you know, in general have just been that ASIRT is working well in its current format, and we just don't want any changes to affect that. So just really general. We don't have specific numbers.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner North-Pagán.
Yes, thank you. I just, you know, a few years back, we had some issues when it came to the naming of officers. I just wanted to know what the circumstances are with naming and not naming officers, and if there's still a gray area within that jurisdiction.
Sure. So there's sort of a national policy on this that a number of different agencies like ASIRT came together and created. And the policy is that officers are named when they are charged. So it's at that point that we release their name in a news release, and it gets always a considerable amount of attention. There's no naming of officers prior to that, similar to how we don't name affected people and so on. And this is consistent with other types of investigations where people aren't named until the point of charging. But that's where we are at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And CPS, I see you have a hand up as well. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Good to see you, Matt. I appreciate you coming, and appreciate the presentation and all the work your folks are doing, not just on the new files, but also working to the backlog, as you've alluded. Just not to put you on the spot, but just interested if you could just speak to us for a second on the level of sort of corporate cooperation between the service and ASIRT when there's investigations that come forward, and if there's any areas that we could improve, or any areas where ASIRT sees as, I guess, opportunities for growth.
Sure. ASIRT has an excellent relationship with CPS. Things go very smoothly with CPS. We have no real issues. I think that we have an excellent dialogue with CPS. Whenever there's an incident, we're in communication quickly. Things have been moving along smoothly on all CPS files. We're in regular contact with the communications teams at CPS on those new files. So I mentioned that we do news releases. Obviously, CPS does releases on these as well. And we have a memorandum of understanding that sort of lays out who can say what and when. And our discussions with the communications teams, they always go really well. It's very, very smooth. And there's no issues about trying to release information that we don't want to release. Yeah, overall, things go very well. And like I've mentioned, I think twice already, one of our favorite things about CPS is that they're body-worn cameras, and those help us so much.
All right, we're going around the table here. We got two more questions and I have one, and then I think we'll have to move on. So Commissioner Campbell, can you please go ahead?
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Mr. Block, for your presentation. It's good to see you again. Do you give a sense of how the skill sets of ASIRT's investigators are evolving or developing as they learn and grow and understand more about systemic racism and incorporate that thinking into the work they do for investigations of police?
So one of the things I think it is really valuable at ASIRT for all of the investigators and the civilian members such as myself is our Indigenous liaison officer. And we do have a number of files that are on First Nations and so on, and he's been quite useful in terms of that, and sort of allowing, there can be a reticence to speak to any sort of police agency, even because we are a police agency, even though we're a police agency that investigates police. And some of these things that we've learned through him and just through more in-depth discussions with communities, either Indigenous and otherwise, have really helped. It's one of the things that I've learned personally at ASIRT is just the more time that we can get speaking with any sort of group seems to help when these files happen, because inevitably there are going to be files that happen with various different groups, and we just need to, I suppose, have existing relationships that we can rely on. In terms of the ongoing training and so on of our investigators, we do have regular training that our investigators go to. One of the advantages of the model that we have of the seconded police officers is that those are current police officers that are going through the training that exists out there right now and are able to bring sort of newer learning to the agency, and so we rely on that as well.
Thanks very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Ogle.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for this. I have I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but across this 8-year period of statistics you have, how many of these investigations led to convictions, and how would that compare to the rest of the countries in other jurisdictions?
I don't have that stat handy, but that is on our website. Yeah, I don't know if I have that ready, but there are certainly, let me see if I have it quickly. No, how it exists on our website is not in the easiest format, but I can tell you that that we have there have been convictions of police officers within the last year for some charges that ASIRT laid. There also have been acquittals. In terms of how it compares to other agencies, I know that in terms of getting charges into court, ASIRT has been more effective at that than the IAO in BC. In terms of the other comparator agencies like the SIU in Ontario, I'm not sure. And again, it's always a little different because we have a different mandate and we take some of these sensitive matters. But there are, we are charging every year somewhere in the range of, let me just look back a bit, over this period of 2015 to, I have up to 2021 in front of me, somewhere from 2 to 7 officers per year.
And just a bit of a, like, is it, and I don't want to be too deep in the weeds, but would those go to trial investigations be more in this sensitive category, or what like, I'm just trying to get a context here of where they go?
There's quite a mix. We've had charges laid in recent years on sexual assault matters, which are the serious and sensitive. We've had them on perjury. We recently had a manslaughter trial. We've had criminal negligence trials recently. So there's quite a range.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I have one last question that may or may not be appropriate to ask here, or I don't know how the answer might come out, but in the graph that you have about the investigations of Calgary police over the last number of years, the trend for all ASIRT has been going down over the last 8 years, but specifically with respect to Calgary police, do you have any thoughts or ideas? Is there any analysis that goes on in terms of why the number of investigations might be going down in that, I think, to a significant degree?
No, and there's a very specific reason for that, is that this is ASIRT investigations, and there's an unfortunate thing about trying to look at a lot of our stats, is that because the director of law enforcement decides whether or not ASIRT investigates, that we look at the drop in files for investigations of Calgary police. It could be that there are less files overall, or it could be that the director of law enforcement has just decided to send less of those to ASIRT. So as much as it looks like a good story, that's our results specifically can't necessarily say that.
Good, I suspected as much, but thank you. I needed to ask anyhow. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. We appreciate both the time you took and the information you've shared, and really appreciate hearing from you directly. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks. All right. And with that, we'll move on. The next item on our agenda was planned to be a presentation on the perception research results, but we're going to move that to the end of the reports in public session because of people's schedules. So we'll move on to the reports from the service. And the next one is with respect to the World Petroleum Congress, which is coming to Calgary in September. While we're not, as commission, not involved, in the operational decisions, we do have a specific responsibility to ensure that the CPS has appropriate plans and policy direction resourcing in place to manage these significant events. The high-profile WPC is going to have a significant impact on Calgarians and will require significant police resources to protect public safety. So we've been discussing these impacts with the service for over a year and are happy to be hearing more about them today and the work that you're doing. So Chief, if you could please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, for sure. So we're hosting the World Petroleum Congress, as you mentioned, in September. Of course, that feels like it's coming quite quickly because of the impacts and the international scope and the number of delegates, as you've alluded. I've designated as a major policing event as per the policy. And so, of course, we do bring intermittent updates as to priorities, planning, and process. And so this will be sort of the second one in the public forum, and it actually will build on the report that was provided in January, the January Commission week. So with that, I'll turn it over to Acting Deputy Clark to introduce the report.
Thanks, Chief. As Chief mentioned, this is the second update on the World Petroleum Congress, which is set to take place on September 17th to the 21st of 2023. In the spirit of open exchange of information between the Commission and the service, we're putting forward our second 3 updates. This one will build on the first update that you received in January. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Acting Superintendent Sheldon Scott and his team.
Thanks, Super. With me today is Jason Archibald. He's provided the information that was they've given in advance, and we'll start off the presentation. In addition, we have Zane Kelly, which is part of our planner, and Staff Sergeant Shane Joyce is part of our planning schedule.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, Jason Archibald, project manager for World Petroleum Congress. I think joining us today also we have Denis Pinchot, who is the president and CEO of the WPC committee. He'll be here to answer any questions specifically for the WPC. Okay, so I have a very, very short update. We did provide a very detailed report. So you all have that information in front of you. This is a very high level summary of that content. So the WPC will take place between September 17th and 21st. The project is on track to finish on time and on budget. There's currently no intelligence that suggests a direct threat. Our operational response planning continues, including scalable components for contingency. We're planning around multiple physical challenges in the event area, and public communication will be coordinated between the CPS, the city, and external partners.
Jason, can I speak up a bit?
Oh, sure. Would you like me to repeat that, or? Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'll start at the beginning. Apologies to everybody. Okay. The WPC will take place between September 17th and 21st. The project is on track to finish on time and on budget. There's currently no intelligence that suggests a direct threat. Operational response planning continues, including scalable components for contingency. We're planning around multiple physical challenges in the event area. And public communication will be coordinated between CPS, the city, and external partners. If I can have the next slide, please. We'll be back with update number 3 right before the event on September 14th to the G&P subcommittee. All right, so with that, we can open up the floor to any questions.
Don't see, oh, there's one question. I do have one myself, but I'll go with Commissioner Campbell first and then Commissioner Ogle. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Archibald, for the presentation and the overview and the report. One thing I did not notice in either the presentation or the report was any reflection of budget. Well, I recognize it's on time and on budget. Did you have any surprises with respect to budget that needed to be included? And feel free to not express those in detail, given that we are in public session. And in terms of those particular surprises or increases from a budget perspective, how would you, from a lessons learned perspective, manage those in future for similar projects of this size?
Thank you, Commissioner. I think I can respond to that question unless anybody else would like to. Okay, so we didn't have any surprises. I think everything, we did a fairly thorough budget planning process about a year to a year and a half ago, and I think we're more or less on track. I think the big surprise is that when I was doing the staffing budgeting, I had planned for double time for all staff across every hour worked. And we've actually been able to avoid that in most situations. So there is a budget surprise, but it's in our favor on the staffing component. Yeah, I think that's the big one.
Thanks very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Ogle, please.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that the WPC happens every other year. Is that correct? In other parts of the world, how often do these happen? And has there been anything? My question is there any past precedent of something happening near while it was on? Or I know you look at it like it looks like there isn't going to be any pressure or nothing. It doesn't look like anything growing as an action, but has it happened in the past at the World Petroleum Congress and other locations?
Commissioner, thanks for your question. Just In regards to that, in preparation for this, we did extensive research and attended Houston prior when they hosted it. The comparison with that one is that it was right after the pandemic and there's only 2 days to open up of travel. So they had small protests, nothing really large, but we've looked back over the previous years, even back to when Calgary hosted in 2000, to continually look at what is continuing evolving as this continues wherever it's hosted. The challenge is that some countries have a military deployment to it. But everything we've looked at how to compare. We looked at similar events across the country. We went to Montreal and we're looking at monitoring Vancouver right now for the energy conference next month. But we're continuing monitoring to see how this may affect this event and general planning accordingly.
Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Lynch Proctor.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question, hopefully you can speak to this. In recent months, the Canadian energy sector has seen increasing activity in terms of cyber threats. One major Canadian company confirming a recent attack an attack as recent as last week. So can you comment on how you're communicating with industry to collect information and to educate on ongoing or new risks in this area leading up to the event?
Sure, yeah, great question. Yeah, like just actually early this week, there was a attack on Suncor, which impacted Petro-Canada for folks that want to get gas. So I would say cyber threats are definitely a concern. We attend the NEST, so the National Energy Security Professionals meeting. It's every 2 months. We attend that. We're continually talking to the folks there to kind of get a litmus test and background of what is going on in the private sector. So we're quite confident in talking with them. There's a lot of great information sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll ask one question for the purpose of this session. I wonder if you can just give a couple of examples about the comment around multiple physical challenges in the area. Is that just the event location? Is that the whole city? And what might that look like?
Right, I can speak to that. Oh, sorry. Sure, well, I think that's a better question for the second part of the meeting.
I will take that as an answer, and that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions for this part of the agenda? No? All right. So thank you very much for that update. We'll look forward to keeping in touch over the next few months before the actual Congress. I'd like to now move on to agenda item 6.2, which is the event planning for another major event that we have in the city on a regular basis, the Calgary Stampede. So I will turn it over to you for that presentation.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, Yahoo. It's coming very quickly before the Calgary Stampede or before the World Petroleum Congress. So back to Joe for the team there, just to give a quick update on the Stampede.
Thanks, Chief. Yes, Chair, the Stampede is back. It's been back for a couple of years post-pandemic, but this is the first year that we expect to go back to a full Stampede, which we're all very excited about. As such, the Calgary Police Service has a robust plan in place to police this event. And here to present the staffing plan is Acting Inspector Jeff Gary, who will also be the incident commander for the entire event. So Jeff, over to you. And I think Jeff's got a PowerPoint, so let's wait for that one to be pulled up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. As it's been mentioned, the Calgary Stampede is considered a major policing event, and I'm just going to explain a little bit more of a high-level overview on our policing plan and an event truly that's a large draw on staffing and resources. The 2023 Stampede will run from July 7th to the 16th this year.
and it's expected to draw about 1.5 million visitors to the event. It's a 10-day event that includes a sneaky peek event on July 6th in the evening, and also our parade, obviously, on July 7th. We expect to see over 300,000 people in attendance. To add to this, there's also multiple offsite events occurring throughout the city. A large portion of them are in one district, but there's also a lot of stampede breakfasts and stuff like that, as I said, throughout the city. I'd like to start by saying that we believe that the necessary planning, policies, and tactics and resources to ensure an efficient, safe policing for this event. If I go to the next slide, please. To speak to the Stampede Parade on July 7th. Our priority has been to work closely with the Calgary Stampede management team on this, and also our external partners within the city. As I said, this is an event that we've hosted for many years, and we've been able to learn from our past years. Specifically the Stampede, for the staffing and deployment this year, it's an event that starts around 9 o'clock in the morning. As I said, it'll draw about 300,000 people. For the policing plan, we're drawing from multiple units in multiple districts. The traffic units will be there to safety and traffic points. We'll be drawing from our beats and our mountain bike units. We'll also be drawing from our tactical units there, and be mobilized in case there's any negative event. We're using a unified command for this event, which will be coordinating with external partners with AHS, CFD, Transit, City of Calgary, roads, parking, and community standards. And we also have a media strategy with our public safety and media relations unit. And obviously, our focus is the safety of our patrons, the safety of our attendees, and also maintaining the safety and the high level service to the rest of the City of Calgary during these events. This event for the parade itself will draw a dedicated incident commander, Acting Inspector Sarah Rowe. She'll be overseeing the coordination of the resources and partnerships with the City of Calgary for that day. If I jump to the actual Calgary Stampede, as I said, the dates are from July 6th to 16th. There's been multiple security, excuse me, lost for words, basically implementations on the grounds itself and around the Calgary Stampede to ensure safety. The Calgary Stampede, as well as details, that we bring, we work at the gates, do bag checks, things like that. We will still have the amnesty program in place this year, where people will be asked to voluntarily leave such things as weapons, drugs, alcohol at the door. We've had this program for many years. The Calgary Stampede staffing on the grounds also supplemented by pay duties. These will be at the Coke Stage, Stampede grounds, grandstand, and this year we've added an additional public safety response team. Essentially what that is more members that are roving on the grounds that are able to be there to assist with any events. We've done some risk mitigation in regards to the tent licensing. We obviously looked at lessons learned in the past, and we've involved the public safety compliance team, which is a combination of CPS, CFD, AHS, city, and bylaw. They'll be working most of the nights, attending all the tents on the ground and also in the periphery, looking for things for like overcrowding, over-serving, and just any breach of licensing. We've also engaged, we looked at the Stampede's Pass and engaged our diversity unit, and I've had some conversations with certain communities based on specific incidents that have happened in the past. And so that's there's been a lot of really good work done there about Stampede service, try to prevent any problems. Sorry, jumping to the next, thank you. Talking about the periphery of the Stampede grounds, obviously it's in one district. And so, as I said, this is a large draw on resourcing. And so District 1 will be staffed across each shift. advocacy group to make sure it's for safety. We've also added, sorry, I know I'm speaking a little fast, give them 5 minutes. We've added public safety response teams in one district. So we'll have the same mandate as the ones that are on the Stampede grounds. They're going to work the periphery of one district and ensure that any major events or any problems, they'll be able to assist them. For the day shift, we've also engaged our community and youth services. They'll be working the grounds, so they'll be doing most of the staffing for the day shift events. We've spoken to our violent crime suppression team. They'll be also involved with local bars. Our bikes and our beats will be working the peripheral locations. We've also looked at, we've also included, not this for the first year, but a partnership with Satina Nation Police Service. We've got an exchange program. They'll be present working the grounds with our members as well. I know that there's discussions right now with Blood Tribe, so you might also see Blood Tribe police officers working the grounds with Calgary. In conclusion, really, we've looked in variables we've considered. We've looked at other considerations, possibility of weather events we've seen. We've looked at the concert lineups and what kind of draw that they bring. As I said, we're expecting the gate last year was 1.3, and then the gate prior to that in 2020 was 100,000. Still post-COVID. We'll be monitoring social media, and as of now, it's slated to be a very positive event. It's nothing that we're not liking. And just finally, we've looked at risk assessments after actual reports of previous years, and we're just tailoring this response to that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. With that being said, that's the formal presentation. We can open up any questions.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Nyson-Jordan.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I just have one question related to increasing risks and your thought on mitigation. I'm thinking specifically not only of the increased number of people that you're anticipating, but also the increased number of protests related to animal health and the rodeo part of it. Is there additional kind of safety concerns or plans in that area? Thanks.
Not that I know specifically in response to the different risks. I think we've had those events in prior years. We have to look at those and tailor our response to that. We've got a great experience. As I said, this is the greatest rodeo on earth, so it's the greatest show on earth. And unfortunately, these are things that we've had to deal with in the past. So to answer your question, specifically this year, there's nothing slated that's any different than any other years.
So just to build on that, we do anticipate that there may be some protests. As you're aware, the Calgary Police Service has a robust protest response plan. Obviously, we respect people's right to freedom of expression, but at the same time, it's not an absolute right. So we'll seek a balance there, and we'll work with the organizer ahead of time to set some of the terms of engagement.
Yeah, I understand it's not a different risk, but it definitely is an increasing risk that we've seen in the last couple of years. So thank you for your response.
Thank you. Commissioner Campbell.
Thanks very much, Chair. Are there specific plans to address the history of increased sexual assaults and intimate partner violence? Will there be increased resources for reporting and patron safety across the various events on the grounds and around the grounds?
So patron safety on the grounds is obviously our number one priority. As far as the increased risk of sexual offenses, I'm not sure how to answer that because what's the source for that? I guess that's what I'm asking.
What? I'm sorry, Superintendent Brower, you're asking me the source for increasing sexual assaults and intimate partner violence at Stampede?
Yes.
So I would say my source for that information would be as a participant and a woman and a regular and knowing friends and allies and coworkers who have experienced sexual assault and intimate partner violence at Stampede. And it is an increased risk. And it has been since 2005, since I have lived in Calgary. So my experience is lived experience and statistical. Any of the sexual assault centers in Calgary could provide you with statistics that reflect that.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Campbell, for clarity. And so I guess just getting back to some of the CPS statistics, do we see a rise in those types of statistics, maybe slightly? However, obviously we have resources in place to assist those people and engage in prevention as well. Like the inspector said, there'll be lots of police officers on the ground monitoring that stuff, and obviously we encourage any reporting and everything else that goes along with domestic violence.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the comment would be it's both on Stampede, but at the various venues that are around District 1 downtown. There's just a whole bunch more people out and about during the 10 days of Stampede. But I think it's also partners who can help with that as well. Commissioner North Pagan, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess this is kind of in relation to what the Commissioner Campbell has addressed. And I used to do security in the core of Stampede for many, many years. A lot of divorces go up, and a lot of intimate violence goes up. The human trafficking in the city goes up. Like these are things I do know working frontline with this event. But I guess what my question is aimed at is the offender management that you actually talked about. Like in regards to how are you looking at offender management with regards to your plan here? Is it monitoring offenders at the Stampede, or is it like, what do you mean by that?
Sorry. Yes, sorry, I can answer that one. Yeah, so offender management, exactly. We've engaged, there's some people that have conditions that can't be in the Stampede, or can't be drinking, or can't be around the Stampede, or for whatever reasons, or no-go conditions. So we have our offender management units that are monitoring these people, and that will make sure that they follow their conditions. And whether it's curfew, whether it's right, because if the risk to the patrons on the grounds will increase if these people go there. So it's that's why I put it in the presentation, is that we're looking at that from preventive measure type of look, instead of just being reactive to them being there. And so information also, we'll be receiving information bulletins every day on wanted people and stuff like that. So that'll be circulated, that intelligence will be circulated on the grounds with all the police officers there. And so we'll be actively looking for that. That answers your question.
I believe Deputy Cook also has a comment.
Just for context, if I could, Commissioner Campbell, I'm just looking back at past statistical reports. And granted, there's only the more serious with a victim 18 years of age and older that come into my bureau within the sexual assault investigative unit. And in July of 2020, there was 38 files. In July of 2021, there was 47. In July of 2022 was 34. The highest months that I can see was back in October of 2021 with 51. Having said that, Commissioner, as you know, as an advocate, we are regularly communicating with our public in around domestic violence and domestic conflict and sexual assault with key partners within the community. Our efforts and our commitment in that space doesn't change. I will agree with the comment in around human trafficking. We can see increases in that, and there's community messaging that we try to leverage and communicate with our community month in and month out.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Cook.
Thank you.
Chair Campbell, sorry, we have one more comment.
Sorry, I can't, we can't hear whoever was just speaking.
Oh, sorry, Chair, it was, it's Superintendent Smart, but I know that Acting Superintendent Scott has a comment as well.
There might be some clarification in this as well. During the stampede, there's daily, weekly and nightly after action reports that we assess. When there's vulnerabilities to certain areas that we see an uptick in crime or violent behavior, we work with the actual venue to look at adjustments. Do we need to increase police presence? Is there different lighting? I use the example of the concert. On a particular night, if there's going to be a concert with a large attendance of people, we'll look at increasing the police presence there. If it's a licensed establishment and we're seeing maybe over consuming, we'll talk about having GLA, or again, is that need to be assessed? Does that be monitored? So each one of those is assessed daily, and we have conversations with them to say, okay, do we need to make an adjustment in our policing and your security that to ensure that we've taken this into consideration, and what do we adapted to that to make sure it doesn't continue on throughout the week?
Thank you very much for that, Superintendent Scott.
Yeah, that's excellent context for us. Much appreciated for those last comments. Thank you. With that, so thank you. That's Stampede, WPC. The next item on our agenda is the discussion about hate crimes, 6.3. And again, I'll turn that back over to the service to give us a presentation, and then we'll open up for questions.
Sure, yeah, it's a timely opportunity, I think, this month for us to be able to the topic of hate crimes, hate incidents, and also how the
sorry, Chief, I'm going to jump in and say it's really hard to hear you.
All right. Okay, I'll try and speak a little louder. Timely opportunity for us to look at this particular topic, I think, and look at the issue of hate crimes, hate incidents, investigations, and how the legislation is applied. And so I'll just toss it over to Deputy McClellan to introduce our speakers for this one.
You bet. Thanks, Chief. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Most of you know, the hate crime team has been very active lately, not only with investigations, but also with outreach and education in the community. So today we have Constable Matt Messenger, who's here to present the work of the team, recent protests, partnerships, forums, and trends over the years, and we'll be happy to answer questions at the end.
Let's wait till the presentation is up on the screen. Thanks so much. I'd like to introduce the hate crime prevention team. Small team in Calgary to have myself as the investigator. We're overseen by a sergeant. We have a strategic analyst that's assigned to us. We also have a unique position in Canada that we have a full-time outreach coordinator that provides presentation education, provides scope of areas within the community. We are proud that we do have an analyst and outreach worker assigned to us. In Canada. Next slide, please. So when it comes to hate crimes, it is a difficult topic to investigate and work around because there's no such thing as a hate crime within the criminal code. The criminal code doesn't even define the word hate. So because of that, we look for different definitions within the code to help us with the scope of our work. We look at things such as sentencing principles, which gives us guidelines on identifiable characteristics for groups and people we interact with in our files. Slide, please. So this definition on the screen there is taken from CPS policy. It is the same across the country for different agencies. A hate crime defines a criminal offense that's committed against a person or property that's motivated in whole or in part by a hate, bias, or prejudice against an identifiable group. As I just mentioned, the identifiable group is taken from definitions in the criminal code. There's two sections in the criminal code that provide those definitions. We'll get into those in the next couple of slides. Hate propaganda is a hot topic right now within the city. It's something we see every day. As you can see on the screen, we see these posters all the time, the banners, different signage of protests and different things. Like I said, we're limited by the criminal code. There's only 4 sections of the criminal code that really pertain directly to hate crimes. So we are limited in what we can do.
We'll go to the next slide. We can go over the sections we have there. So the four sections you see, we have section 318, advocating genocide, 319, sub 1, public incitement of hatred. Next one will be willful promotion of hatred and willful promotion of anti-Semitism. All of these sections, with the exception of public incitement, require 2 levels of approval before I can lay those charges. We need to get Crown approval and Attorney General consent. One of the questions I often see is, why are we not laying these charges? And quite frankly, we're trying. Oftentimes, just we can't. Provide the files to the Crown, and we're just told that there isn't enough evidence or enough case law to help work those files within the court system. Again, context in these investigations is extremely important. We'll see on the next slide. Go to the next slide. See an image here that is a great example. This is taken from a file we had in Calgary not so long ago. Some people, it just looks like graffiti. Others say it's hate speech. Some people just say it's free speech. We know that the criminal code is what guides us. The charter has some flaws and inequities within it, but the criminal code is what we have to work with. It does restrict us, and there's no clear consensus on what hate speech is within the criminal code. This slide itself, the image we see there, it was an advocating genocide file we had. But with context, this was taken from a Southwest neighborhood that's got a large population of Jewish families. This wall was directly across the street from the synagogue. So within that context, we know it's directed, it's targeted hate. A different part of the city, it could just be graffiti and not hate speech, for example. I think this is the best example we have to describe what hate speech is and some of the issues we have when it comes to navigating our way through those files. So what we typically see in hate crimes is hate-motivated crime. These are the assaults, the threats, the harassment, different things we see. So any criminal offense can actually be motivated by hate. Again, we talk about sentencing principles. It's an aggravating factor when it comes to sentencing. If the motivation of the offender can be proven that it was by bias, prejudice, or hate. Criminal code sets out guidelines that identify the characteristics of race, national, ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, or sexual orientation, or gender identity or expression. We have the caveat there of other similar factor, but we're not sure what that covers because there's no definition of it. One thing I can say we're proud of in Calgary, we've recently had convictions on a file from a couple of years ago where the two members of the vulnerable population were targeted, purely based on their status as vulnerable members of our community. We pushed it through court as a hate-motivated crime under the other similar factor. Close relationship we have with the Crown, working with the Crown on this file came really handy for us. Crown agreed with me that this was targeted and likely motivated by hate. In its sentencing, we actually got hate as a factor. It was one of the first times in Canada we've seen that the vulnerable population was taken into consideration as an aggravating factor. So it's a huge win, I think, for us with these types of files. Next slide, please. So these are some examples, like I said. We have assaults, criminals, harassment, sexual assaults, mischief, threats. The one thing we do have, see an image there of a statue outside of a church. There is a standalone mischief section. Mischief is a cultural property. It's a different section under the criminal code, which we can prove a property was targeted by a hate or bias or prejudice. Again, towards us, identifiable characteristics. It's a different section than mischief, and it has a higher threshold for sentencing, which means the penalty can be greater if we can prove that in court. Next slide, please. So this flow chart we put together on our team, we get a lot of questions internally and externally from the community as well. How does our investigations, like how do they go? How do they look? Really, they're no different to any other investigation we have. The only difference, I think, is that we look for why the offense occurred, whereas a typical investigation is if the offense occurred. Once we know it did occur, if we can say that there's a element of a hate, bias, or prejudice, then it comes to us for review. We broke it down on this for simplicity. If the victim is an identifiable group, We have the hate speech section which come into play, or the property damage section like I just talked about, or if it's just a person, we see on the far end of the screen there, we look at what was the offense. If I can prove the offense occurred, if we know the elements of the offense are there, then it's why did the offense occur? What was the motivation behind the offense? What was the ideology and mindset of the accused person? If I can interview the accused, that's amazing, because quite often I find that they talk and it's hard to stop them telling me their ideologies or why they committed the offense. Sometimes it's looking purely at the evidence for provided witness statements, what was said. Context is huge, like we said. Video is best evidence. I find sometimes we can actually see what happened. We do take a victim-centered approach to all our files. Hate crimes are personal. It's a person targeted for who they are and what they believe in. That really hits home with me, and we do try to give the victim everything. Doesn't matter in Calgary if it's a hate crime you're victim of or a hate incident, you get the same resources, you get the same outreach. I believe personally that hate incidents can have a worse impact on a community member or a person than a hate crime itself. The next slide, please. So let's mention the hate motivated incident. So what is that? Basically, it's hate. This is we see overreach incidents where racial slurs or different offensive language at somebody. There's no criminal offense, but it's still hate. A lot of agencies in Canada do not investigate these; they just track them for statistical purposes. We investigate them in Calgary. We give them the same follow-up because it's important. They have the same impact on a person in a community that a criminal offense would. Again, victim-centered approach is important. Gives the victim the voice. I often say that victims of hate crime are invisible. They don't always report. They don't always have a voice. So if we can be that voice and help them be heard, we strive to do that. Again, we know it causes emotional, psychological stress on a person, so we do give them the same resources and the same attention as a hate motivated crime. So we know that 1 in 3 Albertans have experienced hate, but we know that hate is underreported. Factors that we consider when we're investigating our files. You can see on the screen, what were the comments made by the offender? What were the motivation? Was it a lack of motivation? Sometimes that speaks volumes as well. Is it a recurrence? Is the date that the offense occurred on, is that significant? Is it a specific religious holiday? Where did it happen? It's often a big thing we consider as well. We see sometimes with the random, we call them random attacks, they're not so random. I like to think there's always a motivation behind everything. Nothing is really random. So we do look at the random attacks as well and contemplate whether it's potentially hate motivated too. Go to the next slide, please. So we know that year over year, hate crimes are on the rise. Alex, do you like to talk about this?
I would basically just like to add that although it looks like the hate crime volume might be the same over the last 3 years, we have to take into consideration what Matt mentioned earlier, the volume of hate incidents. And the incidents sadly are increasing exponentially, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. So we should probably be always looking at the totality between the incidents, even if there is a criminal offense absent. It's still, the volume is rising, and sadly that's not just a Calgary issue, it's a provincial issue, it's across Canada and actually globally. Hate is on the rise, sadly.
So the beauty of having our own assigned dedicated strategic analyst in Calgary is we don't leave any stone unturned. Alex looks through our system daily for reports that haven't been flagged for us. And speaking to other agencies, they don't have the capacity for that. Our numbers seem higher than some agencies, and it's not because the city necessarily, it's just we're not leaving any stone unturned. Next slide, please. Thank you. Outreach education is crucial in combating hate. Like I said earlier, we have dedicated outreach coordinator in Calgary. It's a full-time position. We're really fortunate to have that. Kelly Morgan has got a wealth of experience as a police officer for a long time within our diversity unit. We take a victim-focused approach to everything we do. So we believe that relationships within hate crime within our community, it's the only way to combat this, I believe. Lots of communities don't want to report to police. They don't trust the system. They don't trust police. They're out of fear. Going forward, if we have those relationships already in place, it takes that burden on the victim sometimes to come forward. It's a huge asset for us. It truly is. Our scope of outreach is continuously growing. We do education within the schools, training. So external agencies such as Calgary Transit, Calgary City Corporate Security, City Police Service are next up for internal training with us. Go to the next slide, please. So this shows some numbers. In the last year, 2022, we provided 229 presentations within schools, community groups, and partner agencies. So far this year, we've given 119 presentations between schools, City Calgary Transit, communications, and different community groups. As you can see on the screen there, we're fostering partnerships with Alberta Health Services, which is province-wide training for their corporate securities and management teams. As well, Calgary Corporate Security we had this morning, and City Police we're starting with next week. It's vital. Community relationships and education is vital in what we do. Hate is everywhere. It's in our schools, it's in our workplaces, it's in the community. The only way we can truly combat this is by providing awareness on it. So in 2022, we did see a rising trend in crimes against homeless and vulnerable population. As I mentioned earlier, the one incident we had recent information on kind of set us off on this path, but we didn't know where it would lead with our outreach. We basically went in cold to the shelters and different outreach organizations and offered outreach education and awareness training on hate crimes, and it flourished. We've done countless presentations at all the different shelters and different partner agencies. Kelly and myself went to ride along the Calgary Transit outreach team, and we saw firsthand how valuable relationships are between law enforcement agencies and the vulnerable population. We're seeing a rise in files. People are stepping up for us and being the voice for members of the vulnerable population. People that necessarily wouldn't want to talk to police and come forward, or even just know that they're a victim of a hate crime, or even a hate incident at that point. People that work around me often hear me say that time of crisis is not the time to hand out my business card. It's something I truly believe in. Again, it comes out to the outreach and education and relationship building. I get phone calls on evenings and weekends from community members that I know, and they trust me, and I do call them friends. They come forward to me directly to report things, not just for themselves, but on behalf of other people in the community. And it's something I'm proud of in Calgary, that we have those relationships in place. So hate crimes and hate incidents are underreported. Building trust is at the core of ensuring that victims of hate crimes and incidents report to us. We know victims may be reluctant to report it. Maybe where they originate from, different countries, they move to Canada, that police just isn't someone you turn to. They're organizations that you're fearful of. Sometimes people aren't out to family members or friends yet, and they're fearful of talking that way. Fear of retribution. They might be embarrassed or feel like they brought it on themselves. They might be the cause of the issue. That's not acceptable, in my opinion. We do strive to have these relationships and build the trust. Recently, we've been out in the community, all areas of the community, trying to build those relationships and bridge those gaps in the trust between the police and different community areas. With that, I'll open up for any questions.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation, great overview. Thank you. Commissioner Campbell.
Thanks very much, Constable Messenger. I know I am one of the fortunate don't know that actually has had to have your card. But I appreciate your work and the work that you do for Calgarians and some of them, including my friends. I've got a bunch of questions because this is a topic, unfortunately, that for which I have great passion and experience with. So, we know, not we guess, we know that the convoy protests, the anti-mask, anti-vaccination, white supremacist rallies with all of their blatant hate propaganda, misogynistic messages, racist materials, and oodles of support by noted hate and terrorist groups like the Proud Boys and their ilk inspired hate incidents in Calgary in the last 3 years. When we think about trying to prosecute those, and it's difficult because of the criminal code and the specific words in the legislation, are there things that these hate groups do that protect them, such as using religious defenses to protect them from being charged with hate speech and hate crimes?
Thanks for the question. It is a difficult topic. We do struggle looking at these files. I actually have an answer from a specialized prosecutor on this. I put lots of files forward for this, for Section 319 quite frequently. I have a lot of open discussions with the prosecutors on this. The answer is that from a legal perspective, hatred is a high and rather fuzzy legal standard. There's no definition of that word in the criminal code, and that is what guides us in what we do as police officers. I find typically a lot of the misquoted what hate speech we see at these protests, these people aren't stupid. They know what they can and can't say. Quite often they're hiding behind their religious beliefs or whatever it is that they're out there protesting for. It is difficult because it's not necessarily outright hate we're saying. They're kind of protecting themselves by being very careful what they say.
Thank you. What impact, if any, did the provincial government's assistance, the appointment of the hate crimes community liaisons, the Alberta Security Infrastructure Program, what have on the hate and bias incidences in Calgary?
The ASIRT grant you referred to is a fantastic resource. It's something we do hand out whenever we see religious institutions, community organizations that are victim of hate. It's a fantastic resource. It's really beneficial for these groups. It provides a lot of funding, a lot of resources for them. We are fortunate that we can offer that to them.
And then my last question, because I think other commissioners will ask what are we doing and what's the game plan? But specifically through Redirect, do we have numbers on youth that have been radicalized by white supremacists and white nationalist groups like, Soldiers and Sons of Odin, the 3%ers, and the listed terrorist groups like Proud Boys and AWD and the Base and folks like that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Those stats aren't something that we typically in our team would keep. We do know these groups exist, and we do have people that represent them in Calgary. I don't have those statistics at this time.
Okay, so probably something that when you get a second officer, we can start to look at. But thank you again, Constable Messenger.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Okay, then I would just say that I appreciate there's a lot of outreach. Muted. Okay, I'm muted. Thank you. There's lots of outreach that's being done. How does that link up to other things that might be around bullying and some of the other outreach teams that sort of touch on the other areas that's not necessarily hate speech, but other things. Is there a way of bringing those together? Is there ways that you can take your messages that get involved in some of the anti-bullying or the other things that you do?
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. So part of what my partner Kelly Bergen does, he has a presentation called The Impact of Hate, which he does primarily for junior high schools. We know that hate is in the schools. Bullying can be a criminal offense. It can be motivated by hate, bias, or prejudice. Again, a big part of what the outreach we do is basically how hate can be bullying within the schools.
Thanks. Yeah, good connect there. Commissioner Tanguay?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's really eye-opening for anyone who sees it, especially the dramatic growth. I'd be curious if you had data previous to 2019. I think that was your first data set, or 2018. The question I have though is, prevention. I'm gonna take Commissioner Campbell's setup and what are we doing about it? But what other groups are we working with? We know discrimination, racism, bullying as a part of that has a lot of consequences, not just social and criminal justice, but health, even longevity of life. We know that people are discriminated upon or live in environments of racism. Those who undergo that discrimination live shorter lives and are more likely to die of medical comorbidities and other aspects. What are we doing and what organizations are we working with to try to bring that information to people and try to change that? I saw some school presentations, which I think is key, is getting to the youth. I love Commissioner Campbell's question. I don't know how you'd figure it out of how many kids are being recruited and brainwashed, I would say is the right word. But I don't know how you would find, like, what's the denominator and how you figure that out. But I am curious what groups you're working with in doing so. As a former teenager in a school that might not have listened to a police officer who walked into the school, I'm wondering if you're bringing other groups in that may be more able to connect with youth and may be able to get the message across a little better. No offense that you can't get the message across, just to be clear. But
yeah, thanks for the question. Funny you should ask that. I typically find in this world that it's other agencies that come to me as a police officer asking for us to come in and intervene and have those conversations. Just this morning, I had a conversation with a worker from West Homes. I'm asking them to do just that. They're struggling with clients that they believe kind of walk in that line of some racial comments every once in a while, and believe that by coming and have that conversation, build that rapport, that relationship, eventually we can kind of steer the people that's in question kind of onto a better path. Other agencies too, we're providing education starting right away with AHS. We know that hate can cause mental health issues. We get that. And we understand that part of working with AHS too is to provide them not only education awareness because some of their workers can be victims of hate, but also because we believe that we also see victims of hate too in the line of work. And if we have those relationships in play ahead of time, we can all work together to try and help the victims out. We are lucky in Calgary too. We have a program called the Redirect Program. We've been in the last year steering that somewhat where people are impacted by hate, victims that may need resources and their families may need help. We are utilizing that as well. They have access to a lot more resources that I can't quote off the top of my head. We're also seeing that the low-hanging fruit offenders on the minor crimes that could be hate motivated. Coming out of court, they're being asked to participate with Redirect and get resources. Maybe it's an education thing that they require. And we're seeing good results.
thank you.
Thanks very much. Commissioner Nyson-Jordan.
Thank you. And every time I hear a presentation like this, I have more questions about why and how. But today specifically, you've identified a very significant frustration with number one, the criminal code, and number two, lack of definitions, and number three, the unwillingness or the high level of requirement of evidence that the Crown prosecutors level at this. And yet I hear some element of, I would say, optimism in the sense that you did get the vulnerable population case through. So I'm just wondering if there's more that you think you can do to either influence the Crown prosecutors, that we could do as a commission to influence that, to maybe take some of these further than maybe lower that level of requirement, because with the number of incidents going up, I think that it is time for us to look at some influence on getting more of them into the court so that people understand that it's not where it needs to go.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'm going to help Matt out a little bit here. And I just want to say, in terms of somebody who can actually get the message across, we've got Constable Messenger. So that says that he's got some innate abilities to communicate in ways that not everybody does. So that's a dad joke. I apologize. I'm sitting here. But no, I wanted to add on there that through the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police, and I know we've discussed it before, perhaps from an advocacy perspective through AAPG, we have sent a letter there to the feds looking for a standalone definition of hate, and that's working with the Alberta Hate Crimes Committee as well. I think we have done a good job here in Calgary because, as Matt's pointed out, we investigate the hate incidents, we chase these things down. We're well connected with the community through our diversity advisory boards. Matt referred to Redirect, and that program is connected directly with the Mennonite Center for Newcomers, the Center for Newcomers. So we're plugged in pretty good. The challenge, I think, and as Matt says, he puts the cases forwards to try to get the appropriate cases that the Crown will run with. I think he made reference to requiring 2 levels of judicial or Crown approval to move those forward. And I think they are looking for, especially in this environment, I do think they're looking for the appropriate cases to run with. But if you think for a second just about working with the vulnerable community. So I think that was really, really good work that was done, recognizing that there was targeting going on there. And they were an identifiable group, one that hadn't been sort of quote unquote marked or identified before in terms of the legislation. But it's difficult in terms of getting those folks to court. And I think there's a lot of challenges logistically in terms of finding the right case and then having the right witnesses. As Matt said, sometimes there's people that were independent witnesses that will come forward. And sometimes you'll have the video and things will be right. And other times it'll be a horrible case, but it won't be right in terms of presenting it. So I think there's challenges. I think we keep pushing forward. And like some of the case law that is being created is coming out of Calgary. So I think it's important to keep pushing the boundaries on this. But I think too, from an advocacy perspective, like aligning like-minded associations and groups and with the learnings as the numbers are going up and where we're seeing some of the pressures, I think that's important too, to try to move the needle on the legislation that continues to be a barrier.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Campbell.
Yeah, I wasn't really finished. I just pretended so. So thank you very much. So what's the action plan for all of this? We're tracking to have probably about 200 plus hate and bias incidents in 2023, based on the data we have for this quarter. And then we have the awful hate that's being spewed at the 2S LGBTQIA community. What are we doing to prosecute those cases, to speak to the hate groups, not the people experiencing the hate? We know it's hate. Trust us, and put in place safety measures for community members, et cetera. I think about all of the festivals that are going to happen this summer and into September, and those folks just need to be protected. So what are we doing? What's the grand plan?
It's a great point, Commissioner Campbell. I think we're continuing to move forward. I think there's a rise in hate, and to your point, the anti-LGBTQ2S+ is not a phenomenon. Certainly this is somewhat cyclical if you look back over history, but we're certainly seeing a resurgence here. as of right now, you've got the advocacy around the legislation. We're seeing things like the municipal government's looking at various bylaws like we've seen here in Calgary. But I think the thing that's been most helpful probably is the work of Matt and folks behind the team talking to those groups. Let's face it, some of those, there's a lot of entrenchment there. In the people that are going out on the streets and going to Reading with Royalty and that type of thing, we're probably not going to change the minds of some of the people that are out doing that. Where we will have some success, I think, is the calls that Matt's getting about the individuals who are just starting to go down the road. I think Commissioner Tanguay referred to it as brainwashing or down that road. I think it's intervening sooner in the schools. And I can tell you, when it comes to the behavior that we're seeing in places like Reading with Royalty, the most successful thing that there's been so far is criminal charges against people who are, they know, they're well advised through some legal groups. They are using, I think your question was a good one. And as Matt said, they're using, it's probably not a coincidence that some of the folks that are out doing this are pastors, street pastors, not necessarily, folks that are, pastors in the formal sense of the word that we would usually look at. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's for protections. But at the end of the day, we will continue to police behavior. And again, when we do lay the criminal charges, we are seeing good success through initially conditions that keep people away from the events. And I think that has, and we saw it in a couple of other previous ones, a real chilling effect on other people who thought it was okay to do whatever they wanted, and they found out that it was not. And in the background, programs like Redirect will continue to work. Our communications there and our relationships with the community hopefully will continue to bring in and increase the reporting, which will look bad, but which is actually really good for us, I think. And as Matt said, because we investigate and provide supports to the incidents as well, because we know they're as damaging or more damaging, I think that's something that we can continue to do. And then I think as we continue to work in our circles across the country, whether it be governance or police services, looking to see what's working in other jurisdictions, everybody's trying something and we're all learning lessons. So.
Thanks very much, Chief. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. And I'll ask if we can keep the questions pretty tight going forward. That would help. So Commissioner Siddiqui, please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Constable, for your report. And I mentioned it last week as well, but the information on social media has been increasing, and I appreciate the fact that you're out there sharing so much. My question is more around internal education. There's one of you. And so there's only so much you can do, and there's so much that you can do externally. What are you doing with your colleagues internally to share this message so that there's more outreach happening with racialized communities with your colleagues on the front line, as well as other sort of key groups within CPS?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Internally, we are in the recruit classes providing education. I've been a police officer a long time in Calgary. I know a lot of the patrol members out there, and they all know what I do within the service. My phone's always ringing. We always provide the education. Like I said, the outreach worker too provides a lot of awareness within the unit. If I didn't have him, I couldn't do it. Because there's only one of me to do the investigations, and the outreach isn't possible for one person. So that's a huge weight lifted having him full time doing that. We are looking at revamping our internal training online as well. That should be coming in the next 6 months to a year, I'm told. So there are things we're doing internally to provide awareness, whether it's internal newsroom posts, good news stories, just being out there. We're visiting the different districts for the NCO meetings within the next few months as well, providing awareness for the team sergeants to pass along. Is there any chance we get to have a conversation about hate? We do it.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one last question, then we'll have to move on. So go ahead, Commissioner Tanguay.
I'll be really quick, I promise. I guess just one last question, which I would say we probably all still have a ton thinking of this. How much cultural sensitivity training is done? And, especially, I just watched an amazing presentation on not cultural sensitivity, but cultural intelligence. And really trying to bring awareness inside of the workplace of different cultural approaches to situations and problems, and how that may affect a team, and how having cultural intelligence can make a huge difference. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to get rid of hate on the officer side, but it does bring more knowledge and awareness to the members themselves, and wondering if any of that is happening internally with the members.
I'm going to jump in just 1 second and then I'll have you guys. So please go ahead with an answer to that, other than my answer, which is lots, but if you can give a really succinct answer, and it will be very helpful, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Cornet, it's Raj Gill here from the Bureau. To quickly answer the question, I'm going to repeat what you said, lots. So we have a number of options. We have training all the way from recruit training, many hours that are spent on cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness. We have guest speakers come in and talk to our recruits from various backgrounds. That training continues on when members carry on their service. As you're aware, last year we rolled out the 17 modules of the Indigenous awareness training for all of our members. And on top of that, last year, or I think in late 2021, Deputy McClellan's Bureau introduced the external advisory board that also provide us with awareness and information, and also review our training programs and offer us advice on how we can continue to improve our training programs and improve our cultural awareness programs amongst our membership.
Thank you, and thank you very much for it. It's an excellent question, and Commissioner Tanguay, I know that you're new to commission, and so maybe we can follow up with this, because there's lots of things. Not to say that there's not more to be done. We never say that, but we've been working on this for a few years, so maybe we can walk through some of that afterwards. With that, I'd like to move on to section 6.4, the crime updates. And there are 2 reports in there. We have the material in our pre-meeting package, so we will have been through that ourselves in terms of reading. So unless there's 1 or 2 points that you'd like to highlight on either one of those reports, I will take it over to questions. So if you want to get 1 minute instead of a 5-minute presentation, and then we'll go to Q&A.
I was just looking at Deputy Cook. I'm looking right at him, Deputy Gill, and Deputy Brar. Both were shaking their heads. We know that you've read the reports. Lots of good stuff in there. Happy to take questions.
So with that, the 2 reports from the Bureau of Investigative Support and Community Policing. Questions from commissioners? Nope. All right. I think I know that we have another number of things going on past these reports. Commissioner Nice-Jordan, so we don't have to belabor it, but Commissioner Nice-Jordan, please go ahead.
Sorry, I had this question written down before. So and this may not be maybe too specific, but the Cal Tire partnership, my understanding, has resulted in some very positive outcomes from a policing perspective. I'm wondering now, when we have the vehicle theft component that seems to be going up a little bit, is there an opportunity to actually do something similar with your dealerships or other partnerships that might help with that vehicle theft way of thinking?
Sure, good question. And so vehicle thefts have always been an issue in Calgary. I remember being a new inspector about 7 years ago when we were dealing with the highest rates. So we're always looking for opportunities or new and innovative ways to work with partners to reduce. One of the programs we have in place is with DMA is the Safe Start program, which runs during the winter months, encouraging people not to leave their vehicles running. We also have the 9 p.m. routine, which we know that a lot of vehicles are stolen as a result of break-in enters, just advising people on how to target harden themselves. But as far as working with the automotive industry, as far as any kind of technological advancements, there's nothing on the horizon now, but we do have a auto theft committee that works between a lot of the major law enforcement agencies to look at reducing these types of things.
Maybe just tack on to that for 1 second, Mr. Jordan. One of the things I worry about, because we do look at the prevention opportunities there with various different auto dealers. But with more technology, actually, cars are becoming increasingly difficult to steal. So we do have a segment of those vehicles that you refers to that are on the high end, and these are vehicles that are targeted by very organized crime rings, and they're vehicles that end up going into containers that are shipped overseas. So those are stolen in a particular way, and we can intervene one way with those. But one of the things I see, the crimes of opportunity, in the past, you can steal some of these older Chev and Honda models and the larger Fords can actually steal vehicles and most commonly stolen. And you can steal a vehicle with a screwdriver very easily. As technology comes on, it's no longer the case. One of the big concerns is that we're seeing that actually people are targeted, and we're seeing the number of carjackings in Calgary begin to go up. So that's a phenomenon we saw a number of years ago start in the US, and actually we're seeing that come to Canada now. And so that's very concerning. So we were just talking about the Auto Theft Committee there through ASIRT, looking at the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police, just looking at trends with what's changing. The numbers aren't changing so much, but I think the way that the crime is happening and how people are being victimized is what's changing. So that's something we also need to keep our eyes on going forward, because you need the keys in many cases to steal a vehicle, and some of them are coming from actually taking it directly from the person sitting inside it, which is frankly quite frightening.
Yeah, I just know that a lot of times education is, we get up to here, and it's really the technological changes that you can partner with other people that make a difference in a lot of circumstances. So thank you for your response.
Thank you. And thank you for those two reports. For people who are looking at the Zoom or the meeting afterwards, there's all of this information, or at least a large part of this information, is available on the CPS website. And we do go through the reports and read them. So thank you very much for putting them together. Just because it's not a huge amount of discussion tonight does not mean that we've not been through them and are interested. So thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to the anti-racism action plan update. And I'll turn it over to you for a quick review and then a Q&A on that one as well.
Hey, the outstanding item on the agenda here, an important update. I'll flip it over to Deputy McClellan to introduce.
Sure. Thanks, Chief, and thanks again, Commission. So I'll go over a couple of brief highlights. I know you have a lot of information in the package that you provided, but there, as the Chief said, there's lots of work that's been going on. So just take a few minutes to just talk about some of that. So just as of today, actually, our anti-racism team hosted an information session for all of our returning internal ARAC members. This was an opportunity to meet with our new anti-racism manager and to thank all the sworn and civilian members for committing to being part of this journey and helping our service advance our anti-racism and racial equity work both internally and with the community. Some of the discussions included an overview of the anti-racism strategic roadmap, an introduction to the current members of the team, a review of a lot of the work that we have accomplished, a lot of the work that we have underway, and an update on how we have advanced the work of anti-racism and racial equity within our organization. On June 21st, the anti-racism team, in partnership with Habitus and Action Dignity, collaborated to discuss the initial stages of completing the community, the community engagement report. This report, which will be delivered at the end of August, will capture the perspective of the community to guide the service on actions required to address anti-racism within the service and the community. A couple of updates with respect to our diversity team. The month of June, as many of you know, involved many connections and collaborations with the community and members of our diversity resource team. Within this month, members attended the Ukrainian Festival, the Lilac Festival, the Central Library for the 100-year centenary of the Chinese Immigration Act, and hosted a soccer match between the CPS and the Latin American community. Just last night, we were pleased that the diversity team hosted an advisory board networking and appreciation night here at CPS headquarters. The event was open to all advisory board members, and it was a great opportunity to show our gratitude for their support and guidance, along with music and dancing to showcase Middle Eastern culture. Our first 5 community mobilizers have just completed their training, It was about 5 weeks, and they will be joined by their Indigenous colleagues who we've hired 4, and those mobilizers will begin on July 18th. With respect to our Indigenous Relations team, we remain committed to addressing police-related truth and reconciliation calls to action and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls calls for justice. As we reflect on the personal and organizational growth throughout Indigenous Awareness Month, we also honor the beginning of summer solstice as a new season and a chance to continue walking in the path together with the Indigenous community in partnership and in a good way. As the chair mentioned earlier, we were truly honored to be invited to participate in the grand entry for Aboriginal Awareness Week Calgary Family Powwow at Stampede this past Saturday. We want to thank all the special guests and dignitaries, including the Aboriginal Awareness Week Calgary Committee, for including us on this special day. As we transition resources and ensure continuity of the foundational work accomplished by the team, we have recently posted positions for a sergeant and 2 constables. These postings will be completed by July 12th, with the successful candidates being selected no later than July 20th. The former members of our IRT are still engaged supporting the service and the community through this transition phase. Just a quick point on our crime prevention team. We will continue our summer messaging campaign to promote public and personal safety. These include following the 9 p.m. routine to ensure the security of our homes, gardens, campers, and vehicles, and personal safety around Stampede festivities, as well as addressing social disorder and community issues. Just a very quick update with respect to our community safety investment framework and the work that we're doing with the call diversion. At $9.1 million has been allocated from that partnership, the city and ourselves, to fund 26 programs in 2023. With respect to our 211 and 911 initiatives, we continue to see those calls being increased for non-emergency mental health and suicide calls, and many have been handed over to the distress center, and others have been diverted to the mobile response team or our community mobile response team. We're now midway through our CMCR pilot project, and we are holding a strategic planning session with the leadership team at the Alex next week to make some adjustments to assess maximum effectiveness. We have been looking to see how we can come up with the best model for our wraparound case management and support for those in need. So we've been doing some research and reaching out to partners across the country. And we've learned that situation tables are modeled after the hub model from Saskatchewan and more directly the focus model from Toronto, which we are going to be looking at. These are intended to provide multidisciplinary services to individuals who are at the brink of crisis or currently in crisis. One of the challenges, of course, as we have talked about in the past, of integrated case management is the sharing of personal information with community partners. We believe that the barriers present in legislation can be mitigated by robust information sharing agreements and MOUs with partner agencies, which we are currently developing. With respect to the Real-Time Integrated Mental Health and Addiction Center, also known as right now the RIMHAC, we have been meeting lots with our partners in the month of June. We conducted one-on-one meetings with a number of our partners. We're looking at our next steps. We know that we need to establish an accountable entity or a governance structure for the administration of all partners who will be co-locating. Our legal team is now developing 2 proposed governance models, which will be proposed to our RIMHAC partners during a follow-up meeting in the near future. It is envisioned that there will be an interim governance model, which will be sufficient for the planning and operationalization of the facility, likely chaired by CPS for now, followed by a long-term sustainable governance model. As I said, we're working with our partners and legal to draft MOUs and have those signed by our partners. That's a lot of information in a very short period of time, and I am happy to take any questions.
And again, the same goes for the report. We'll have read some of those, so I'll turn it over to Commissioner Siddiqui to begin.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Deputy Chief, for your report. My question is around the internal ARAC. I know that you have had some changes on the external one. What about the internal group? Have there been changes? Are there folks continuing? What's the plan to sort of, I guess, move people in and out to get more information around the anti-racism work?
Thanks, Chair, for your question. And so, yes, there has been some changes. New people have joined, some people have left with respect to just personal choices or time. Really, truly, in all transparency, with respect to our capacity on the team, you know that we lost some of our employees on the on our ARAC team. So we were just, as I shared, we just started with our new manager on the ARAC team, and so she just started a couple of weeks ago. And so Inspector Martin is in the room. As I shared earlier, we had our meeting this morning, and it was a great meeting. We continued to engage. We've got lots of support, lots of questions. As Deputy Gill spoke to earlier, we've got modules on e-learning, and there really is, you know, we've been down this path for a couple of years. We know that it's going to take time to make a lot of changes, but we have, with the support of our internal members and our external partners, really moved a lot of things forward. And truly, just that engagement at the table, the want to come and have the conversations and ask questions, has really been rewarding. And I think we've definitely moved the needle. But Inspector Martin, you're in the room here. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Siddiqui. We did have that meeting tomorrow, and I can say that it was a huge success for us to re-engage our current internal ARAC members, and that's with the goal of now, you know, workshops and in-service training along with our CCLC and along with, you know, some trauma-informed investigations that we're going to have with major crimes this September as well. And we're going to really use our internal ARAC as the foundation now to go out to their peers, right, to their own business units, their sections, right, their teams, and then start to really advance our anti-racism work. So that is the near goal or the future plan for us in terms of expanding our internal ARAC.
Great. Thank you both for that answer.
Thank you. And Commissioner Campbell.
Thanks very much, Chair. And Inspector Martin, since you're in the room, a special thank you to you for your work in preparing that report. It was extensive and well done. Deputy Chief McClellan, I'm really looking forward to your presentation with Superintendent Rashid and Commissioner Siddiqui in August at the CAPG conference on alternative response models and Calgary's work in that area. It's substantial and significant, and you should be really proud that you're leading the way from a Canadian perspective. In the case where the white supremacists beat 3 homeless men on purpose, and will this case receive some more coverage in local and national media? The article that ran in the Herald seemed to leave out that the victims were unhoused and that the assailant purposely sought to harm those who were substance users and unhoused. It also failed to acknowledge the precedent-setting nature of this case. And I want to acknowledge Constable Messenger, because I know that you worked really hard and put some significant passion to ensure that prosecutors understood the opportunity for a hate crime charge to come about there.
Thanks, Commissioner. I appreciate that. Yeah, the support is great. I really do appreciate that.
Thanks, and thanks, Chair, for thanks, Commissioner, for your questions. Was there, or for your comments and feedback? Was there something specific you wanted answered there?
It's probably a question for Mr. Nunn. If there's an opportunity to provide more coverage of this particular case in local and national media.
You grab that, because I think that was the early part of the question and I missed there, but I think because the charges were laid, like what was picked up, Commissioner, was what was picked up. We probably wouldn't say any more now because the case is before us. But certainly, I think once a conviction is secure, assuming that's the outcome, there would be an opportunity then perhaps to be able to talk about some of those things, but we'd be fairly constrained right now in what we would say.
Thanks very much, Chief. I understand. Back to you, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for all of the reports that have come forward this afternoon. It's just, it's a little bit overwhelming some days to see all of the work that goes on from month to month when we get these reports updated and all the numbers and statistics from all the bureaus and all the good work that's being done by specialty units like the hate crimes with all of the work that you do there. So thank you very much for all of that. With that, we're going to circle. So thank you to all of you. We're going to circle back now to the presentation on this year's community perception research results. So for that, I'd like to introduce Angela Storozak and Yvonne Brouwers from Illumina Research Partners. One of the ways our commission hears from Calgarians each year is through our annual community perception research, which in the past was called Citizen Satisfaction Survey. We alternate each year between quantitative community satisfaction survey and qualitative research into a timely topic. This allows us to track Calgarians' views on safety and policing over time, while also allowing for us to consult Calgarians on the decisions and issues before us. This year, Illumina conducted focus groups on our behalf to learn what impact the Calgary Police Service's communications is having on public trust and what the service can do better to meet the information needs of Calgarians. So welcome to you both. We've had good conversations in the past, so please go ahead with a presentation on this year's results.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We've got 20 minutes this afternoon to share highlights from the 2023 Community Perceptions Research. And as Chair Cornett has said, this year our focus was a qualitative investigation on the impact of communications and transparency on trust in the Calgary Police Service. I think many of you know me, and Angela, you've seen us before, but I'm Yvonne Brouwers. I'm President and CEO of Illumina Research Partners. Just a quick about Illumina. We are a Canadian Research Insights Council accredited research agency. That matters because what that means is that we follow best practices and global standards in research analytics and insights. And when you're dealing with the type of topics that you deal with, that kind of trust and confidence really matters. With me is Angela Storozak, who Vice President at Illumina. She's going to be presenting the highlights from the research today. And I think, as Chair Cornett has said, each year we do quantitative research one year, qualitative research the next year. This is qualitative research. What that means, we talk to fewer people in much greater depth. So really interesting, important findings this year on trust. And over to Angela.
Thank you. So we're going to dive into the research this year, and I want to talk a little bit about the topic here. So the topic this year, as we just talked about, was the communications and transparency and how that impacts trust in CPS. But more specifically, we wanted to gather in-depth understanding of what Calgarians want to hear from CPS and the best channels to communicate to them. So we focused on exploring 4 areas of CPS communication: addressing crime, crime prevention, handling calls involving people in crisis due to mental health or addictions, and transparency and accountability of police actions. Generally speaking, we wanted to gain a better understanding of what Calgarians want to hear from CPS. Are they getting the information they want to hear? What is missing? And the impact of this information on all of these communications, on trust and perception of CPS.
Everybody is having no trouble seeing the screen, just to confirm that. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great. So what did we do? As has already been mentioned, we conducted 4 2-hour online focus groups with Calgarians. We did 2 groups with Calgarians who said that they trusted CPS, and we did 2 groups with those who said that they don't trust CPS. So the reason that these 2 different groups were identified as priorities for this year's qualitative research was because in last year's quantitative research, which was the 2022 citizen satisfaction research, we learned that Calgarian trust in CPS had significantly declined. So from 85% in 2020 down to 77% in 2022. And we also heard in that research that Calgarians mentioned that communications is a top area for improvement. So we wanted to understand in this qualitative research this year, is there a difference in the communication needs for people who trust CPS and those who don't trust CPS? We talked to a diverse group of participants from a whole mix of backgrounds. So we had different ages and genders. We had a mix of Calgary communities representing all police districts in Calgary. We had some new immigrants to Calgary within the past 5 years. We had a mix of people who self-identified as different ethnicities and cultural backgrounds. We had some LGBTQA+ citizens, and we also had a mix of citizens who had contact with CPS in the past year and those who have not. Any good research really needs to consider the larger context, and there's just 2 things that I want to point out. First, there were violent crimes that happened downtown and at the C train in the couple of months prior to the focus groups. And there was also an announcement by the City of Calgary about actions to make transit safer. And we really heard this reflected in the focus groups this year, where participants expressed concerns related to safety in the downtown and on the transit system. In these groups, we also talked to participants about CPS's 2 pilots for handling calls involving people in crisis due to mental health and addictions. So that first pilot was launched in February 2022, and that was where they co-located 911 and 211, so that calls about social supports can be diverted to the distress center. And then the other pilot, the community mobile crisis response, where crisis workers are sent to people in crisis instead of the police, that was launched in February 2023. So those were the 2 things that I wanted to just touch on as far as the external context. Trust is really core to policing, and we wanted to provide some background context about trust from global research that was presented at the 2022 SOMAR Congress. So SOMAR is the Global Organization for Market Research, Insights, and Analytics, and its annual conference tends to present some of the latest learnings that are out there. So what we learned is that trust is 2 components. There's capability trust and there's character trust. Capability trust is the ability of CPS to meet citizen needs or Calgarian needs, and it's what you do. Whereas character trust is the perceived motivation of CPS to be honest, good, and do no harm. So it's that perceptions of how you do it. What we also learned in the community perception focus groups this year is that trust in CPS is impacted not just by one thing, it's impacted by a few different things. So it's impacted by collaboration with the community, it's impacted by communications, and it's impacted by experiences with CPS. And when we talk about communications, we mean communications both by CPS and by other sources like the media. So let's dive into the summary of key insights. So as we mentioned just a couple minutes ago, we talked to 2 different groups of citizens, citizens who trust CPS and those who do not trust CPS. And what we learned is that their communication needs are very similar across all the participants that we talked to. What they want to know from CPS and their advice on how to communicate with them remain the same, regardless of their level of trust at CPS. The key difference, though, is that participants who stated they don't trust CPS, they had an appetite for more communication from CPS and more communication more frequently than participants who already trust CPS. We also heard that there is a willingness or an openness to trust CPS again among those who don't trust CPS. And that was really good to hear. But the challenge is that it's going to take a long time. It's going to need a consistent long-term effort by CPS in their interactions, communications, and community collaboration initiatives. We learned that there are 5 things that are impacting trust in CPS from the participants. So that's personal experiences, witnessing police interactions, communications, community collaboration, and then perceptions of safety. So starting with personal experiences, we heard how positive experiences with CPS build trust when officers are perceived to be approachable, easy to work with, reassuring, a rapport is built, and participants are confident that CPS will be there to help them when needed. But on the flip side, negative experiences that make participants feel unsafe and reduce their trust and confidence will reduce their trust and confidence in CPS. And we heard from people who've had negative experiences that trust can remain really low even after many years have passed since a negative experience. So it takes a long time to rebuild that trust or change that trust once they've had that negative experience. The next thing that can have an impact on trust is witnessing police interaction. And participants shared that witnessing CPS effectively deal with the situation actually strengthened their trust and confidence in CPS. It made them feel safe and that they felt then that CPS was really doing a good job. But when they witness interactions where CPS is perceived to be disrespectful, not listening, or there is perceived to be poor treatment of certain racial or cultural groups, or maybe marginalized individuals, this really diminished their trust and confidence in CPS. The third factor that impacts trust in communications is communications. So what participants see or hear through various channels such as TV, radio, social media. And for the most part, what we learned is they actually do believe what they hear about policing, crime, and safety via different news channels. The one place where is social media, where they perceive that to be the least trustworthy channel. And they talked about verifying social media information through other news sources or through Googling it. The fourth factor impacting trust in CPS is community collaboration. So participants had, generally speaking, had really low awareness of current CPS initiatives to collaborate with the community, and including the 2 pilots for handling calls involving people in crisis due to mental health or addictions. Participants felt that these efforts to collaborate with the community build trust because it shows CPS is listening to the community and is trying to improve. The response to those pilots was very, very positive. I just wanted to pause there for a minute and let everyone know that. We had to let people know and let the participants know that about these pilots, but they were very positive about it. They thought that it showed that CPS had making a real effort to improve, and that they were listening to the community. So I want to make sure that I get that message across. The last thing that really impacts trust in CPS is perceptions of safety. Participants talked about how it is really important for CPS to maintain and improve safety in Calgary. And they do consider that visible presence, particularly in those higher crime areas, as a way of helping to prevent crimes. They talked about 5 safety concerns that they have. First off is that they do perceive that CPS is inadequately staffed for a city the size of Calgary. They have concerns about downtown and the transit or C train safety. They don't feel those are safe areas. They did feel that drugs, gangs, violent crimes, youth crime, and crime at night are additional concerns, safety concerns for them. And they felt that CPS could probably improve in those areas. Slow response times were a safety concern for some participants because they perceive that they may not get the help when they really need it. And then finally, some participants also voiced concerns that racial misperceptions and stereotypes by some officers, not all officers, may result in poor experiences, making them feel unsafe. So participants did acknowledge throughout the groups that there are, or they acknowledge, they perceive that there are good officers and bad officers, and that they are never sure what the next interaction is going to be like. And so. There are 5 topics of information that participants talked about that they want to hear about. So the first one is, what is CPS doing to address crime? With a focus on being kept up to date on major crimes and big safety issues in the city, and how CPS is responding to them. They wanted to be kept up to date on the progress of those crimes, and then when the criminals are caught, so that they know those people are off the street. It was also shared that they felt that CPS actually does a good job of arresting and charging people for crimes, but participants felt that the justice system often releases criminals too quickly, many of whom are repeat offenders that just end up getting arrested again. So they talked about how it would be helpful for CPS to communicate the role of CPS versus the justice system, so that they can, in a really simple infographic format, help increase citizen knowledge about the process and the different roles. And they felt that that increased understanding by citizens can really help build trust and confidence in CPS. Additional information that interested them was also hearing about overall crime statistics, dangerous offenders, and missing persons. The next topic of information that they really wanted to hear about was crime prevention. And they actually perceived that crime prevention information is lacking. So they commented that they rarely hear about crime prevention, and that almost all of the news that they hear is about reactive policing, where the police are addressing a crime that has happened. Participants are interested in hearing about crime information such as practical safety tips to prevent crime, what's happening with youth education, and proactive measures being taken by CPS to make Calgary safe, such as what's happening with, for transit safety or to improve safety downtown. Participants did say that crime prevention information, they feel that that demonstrates that CPS is being proactive in trying to keep Calgary safe. Participants are concerned that there isn't a good balance of communication. So they feel like there's too much focus on communicating reactive policing stories, such as shootings or stabbings, for example. And that they feel is making people feel unsafe and diminishing confidence in CPS. So they felt that a more balanced approach to communications with a balance between reactive policing with crime prevention would help build trust and confidence in CPS. The third thing that they want is more personally relevant community-based information. So they want to be kept informed about crime or safety issues that affect them personally, their family, and their community. So one example that was given by participants was, what are the top 10 crimes in my community? And then what are the crime prevention tips that I can take to reduce the likelihood that I'm going to become a victim of one of these crimes? They also want to be part of the solution to keep Calgary safe. So Participants want CPS to be accessible in the community and engage more with citizens in person to build those community relationships and trust. And there was a few participants who suggested that the community liaison officer is an opportunity to make CPS more accessible in the community, build better relationships, and provide that crime and safety information that's relevant to that specific community. They also indicated they would like more communication about the best ways to contact CPS for different types of crimes, such as by phone, text, online, in person, or at a police station. And where relevant, what are the numbers that they should call or text for the different types of crimes? For example, is it the same number or a different number for a mental health crisis versus transit crime? Versus a property crime, for example? So there were a lot of questions about how do you contact CPS for different types of crime? What is most effective? The next topic that they wanted to talk about or hear about, I guess, is community collaboration. And they thought this was a really important topic to communicate. Participants lacked awareness generally about CPS initiatives to collaborate with the community, and that included a lack of awareness about the 2 pilots for handling calls involving people in crisis due to mental health and addictions. As I said it a little earlier, they were very, very positive. The response was very, very positive once we informed them about these 2 pilots. And and most participants thought that these pilots should be much more widely communicated. These pilots show CPS is making an effort to improve. You're listening to the community, and this was all very, very positive, and people felt this really had an impact on how they felt about CPS and their trust in CPS. I'd like to say that we did hear from a few participants who recognize that CPS actually has improved over time in its ability to handle these types of calls, and they perceive that there has been some officer training. We had one participant who talked about how they witnessed CPS's hands-off approach to talk a person in crisis down and get that person to a safe spot. Another participant talked about their own personal mental health crises, more than one actually, and how the officers that participant dealt with were amazing in all instances that this person talked about. So very good feedback from participants on that. That being said, though, participants don't believe it should be CPS's responsibility to handle these calls for people in crisis due to mental health and addictions. They believe that community social agencies are better able to help Calgarians in these situations get the help that they need. Participants had 3 overall pieces of advice on how to communicate to Calgarians. So first and foremost, they want you to make the message really quick and easy to understand. Basically, the feedback was that life is really busy and they really don't have time to consume a large amount of content. So use plain language, avoid policing jargon, visualize the content, so they can see what you are trying to say. They shared that posters and one-page infographics are quick and easy ways to help them get key messages. They wanted to make it believable. So they wanted authentic with pictures, stories, and proof points, and just boil down the content to its essence and chunk it out so it's easy to follow. Just really avoid those lengthy reports. The second piece was to build in the human element. So this actually was something I wasn't expecting to hear from participants, so it was a real surprise to hear it from across all the groups, is that participants suggested the CPS could build a human face and personality for the service to make it appear more human, approachable, personable, genuine, all of those things. One idea suggested by participants was to partner with a third-party reputable civilian or citizen to help be the bridge between the police and the community so that Calgarians know where they can go to get trustworthy information on crime, safety, and policing in Calgary. The third piece of advice is to extend the reach of communications through a wider variety of channels. So currently, news like through TV, radio, newspaper, and social media are the primary channels through which they're hearing about crime and safety in Calgary. But they had suggestions to increase the reach, and that would help reach a more diverse group of Calgarians. So having things like posters or infographics at public places such as libraries, gyms, recreational centers, the transit station, paper flyers, maybe weekly or bi-weekly podcasts was another idea, particularly if you're partnering with someone else. And then the increased accessibility of the community liaison officer was also suggested as another way to extend reach, particularly through things like town hall meetings to reach older citizens or citizens who don't use social media. We'll finish today's presentation with 4 trust building guidelines. So the first one is to balance communications between those reactive policing stories that talk about the crimes that are happening in the city versus crime prevention and what can be done to prevent crime and how CPS is being proactive to make Calgary safe. They also, secondly, would be to communicate in ways that will reach the different segments of Calgary's diverse population, including making sure that communications are quick, easy to understand, and they use a wide variety of channels. Third, collaborate with the community to improve safety and deliver your services. That is what they're looking for. They really want to work with CPS and help make Calgary safe. And last, be human and relatable so you feel more genuine and approachable. Chair Cornett, that ends our presentation of the highlights.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I will open it up for questions. We'll start with Commissioner Mallon.
Thank you, Chair. I think, I know we don't have time today, but I think that this presentation calls for kind of an opportunity for us to really talk about next steps and what would we do. And the message that I hear clearly, or that I discern from this, is we have to figure out where this communication should be happening to reach a mass audience. Like even in the participant groups, it sounds as if the researchers had to tell them some of the stuff we were doing in order to get a response. So we need to know where to share this information. Just one example, when we got that, those little snippets on public safety or safety in public spaces, it answered a lot of things that I hear people in my neighborhood asking. So I asked and did post it in my neighborhoods, which are Mount Pleasant and Crescent Heights. And nobody ever listens to my post, but I got like 4,500 views of that and a whole pile of questions. So there are places that people are looking, and I guess maybe we move it to committee or something to really talk about how do we identify those places to reach people so that the next time we do qualitative research, we don't have to tell them what we did and then get an answer. So that's just a thought about that. I don't know where we post to be most effective for mass communication to let people know what we're doing.
Thank you. And thanks for that comment. I had a similar thought. Commissioner Tanguay.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the great presentation. I just like to be mindful that the end value or the number of people in this survey is pretty low. And so jumping to conclusions is something that we shouldn't do. At the same time, I fully agree that this is a nice stepping stone. I loved the idea of having a third party help with communications and a place for people to go to get information. You'd figure you could just go onto CPS website, but it may be just a safer spot for people to feel more comfortable getting that info. The other thing I really took into this is a few things about things that are fairly obvious in the media around violent crimes in our transit and downtown and some of the drug issues. seemed to also weigh out in the survey itself. What I really, really liked, and I'm curious of what your thoughts are there, is there was a mention about interactions and having a positive interaction really made a difference. And the fact that there aren't enough officers here. And, you know, I've had the luxury of working with many different groups across the country, and they'll all say the same thing. They don't have enough officers. It doesn't matter what area you're in. And the reason they respond to that is my question is about what happened to community policing, meaning having members on the ground, talking to people. My whole shift is just going store to store and talking to whoever's working there and whatever's going on. Literally the whole job of being on the street and just communicating and chatting and having a presence. And often chiefs and deputies will always tell me the same thing. I don't have enough members to do that. And I think that what we hear from the survey is people would like that. They want those positive interactions. They want to communicate with people. And, you know, we know their presence adds to safety. So I'm curious if you felt the same way, if that's what people were looking for.
Yes, I think in the ideal world, citizens would love to have CPS in the community on the streets where they could get to know them and build those relationships and know that, they're very close by. On the other hand, they also acknowledge that it really isn't feasible. And they know that from the fact that, one, yes, we don't have enough officers, but two, they also realize that means there would be an impact on their wallets and their taxes. So I think they do understand that there's a trade-off. They would like absolutely to have CPS out in the community, and people in the groups acknowledge that, well, maybe one of the solutions was that community liaison officer and having that person available and finding and just maybe communicating better, because most participants didn't know about the community liaison officer. So maybe better communication of that officer and how they can contact that person might be an opportunity to help address some of that, right?
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Campbell.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Browers and Mr. Rosick. My question is actually for CPS. So in the report, and I'm looking at some of the fairly negative perceptions, I'll use the example of the one that's on page 19 of 52. There's some fairly significant behavior that the Republic have reported that by their view is seen as unacceptable. And that behavior has created a negative perception. So for CPS, are we at a point now where we own that this has occurred and we have a process to think through how to address those specific perceptions? Sorry, there's thunder and lightning outside my window. Probably because I'm actually speaking. Do we actually own and believe that this has occurred? And do we have a plan to address it?
Hard, as you know, Commissioner, those examples, I guess, that get put into the report, like the one on page 19, are anecdotal. Like they're not attributable, and it's good more information about what's happened. But I think it's not inconceivable that there's incidents like that happen, because when we talk with our diversity advisory boards in the community and stuff like that, we know that can happen. I would say that it's anomalous for the most part, though. Like, I mean, it doesn't reflect in our complaints that we get. It doesn't reflect in the majority of the interactions. I would say that it's exceptional behavior in a bad way. And so, do we own it? Certainly. But if it occurs there, we own it. I think the stuff we've talked about there with respect to the work being done, we talk about hate and stuff like that in Matt's group. When you talk about anti-racism, organization. All the discussions around Deputy Gilman, the diversity and the cultural sensitivity programming and stuff that is being updated all the time. I think we're gradually moving in the right direction. And yeah, I guess I would just say we totally own it. When there's issues, allegations of misconduct, but yeah, I saw that in the report as well, and yeah, I think that could happen. But I think that's exceptional behavior in the negative way.
Thanks very much, Chief. I appreciate that. I think what I wanted to really make sure that we understood coming out of reviewing this report, hearing the presentation, is that this isn't happening somewhere else. It isn't because of events that are occurring somewhere else. It is because of things that are occurring with CPS officers in Calgary with Calgarians, and that's the source that we need to be let's say owning and addressing. So back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Siddiqui.
Thank you, Chair. I guess, the comments around communication, it's nothing new. Like, we've been hearing this ever since I've been on commission for 4 years. So I guess my question is towards the chief and the deputies in terms of how are you going to action some of these changes and some of the timelines specifically around simplistic communication? Because I think there are some quick wins there and we're missing out.
Thanks, Commissioner Siddiqui. I agree. And I think every time we've got this type of information, I think the survey is really good. And a lot of, it builds well on what we did last year. A lot of good messages, and there are a lot of very practical messages about things we can do and how we can connect. And I think it does beg the question, what's next? For me, one of the things that is next is we've talked previously about a bit of restructuring that's planned here, and looking at ways that we can be more effective with respect to corporate performance, including communication. So I think there will definitely be follow-up and action that comes from this. I think people want to have messages in different mediums. They want to have neighborhood-specific engagement around things that aren't necessarily citywide trends, but just in their own areas and ways that they can help. And I think all of that is really, really positive news, even among the people. And I appreciated the comment among the people who maybe have lower levels of trust in CPS. They're still open to it and want to. And so I think that's fantastic. And I think we need to take what we can. Dr. Tangay's point is a good one about the end value in the survey. But I do think that it's probably a lot of the information that we receive is good, instructive information from the community telling us how they would like to be communicated with. And so I think there's a lot we could take away from this, and we will.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. I don't want to be directive, but I'm just curious, is there a timeline so that we can come back and have a little bit more of a thorough conversation around that communication piece once the changes are done that you're talking about?
The timeline for us is we'll be looking at this right away. I actually just read the report earlier this week. So
fair enough.
It's too soon for that as a group that we'll look at it. I'm mindful that the CBC doesn't come back until the fall, so I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the fall. And by that time, we'll have had some time. I mean, I'm also mindful of organizational capacity going into the summer here as well. We tend to have limited staffing in the summer because of vacation. We're going to have the events that we've talked about earlier, which is not an excuse. It just talks about capacity and trying to be realistic. So, but a lot of the things in here are not difficult things, as you know. And Michael's area has been working on, the corporate communication strategy, which can be reflective of all of this. But I think there's a personal piece as well. There's the way we're communicating from our districts, our CROs, a couple of references to how important they are. As we look at growth and where we invest in the future, as well with some of the additional officers coming online, those are areas where I think we could actually increase our communications at that neighborhood level and be more accessible. So I think there's a bunch of ways we can action this. And I think we'll be back to talk to you about it in the fall as soon as the CBC comes back to regular meetings.
I look forward to hearing that in the fall because, communication has been, the comments around communication have been happening for years. So look forward to seeing some of those easy wins in September when we get back together. Thank you.
And Commissioner Rosell.
Yes, thank you. I think a couple of times the low number of participants was brought up, and maybe you mentioned this and I just missed it, but I know there's cost limitations on the survey, but is there any other reason that it was so low? Like 26 people out of 1.3 million. I think it's great information, but you can't extrapolate from it. It's just a really small number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Angela. Yeah, we can talk about this. I mean, I'll start off by saying there's two broad types of research. The research that's meant to be projectable to the population, where you can quote numbers and you've got some confidence in those. That's the quantitative research, which we do alternate years. But then there's the in-depth qualitative research, and the goal there is to talk to fewer people, but really to get in-depth understanding. And I think what's really powerful about this research is that it's connected. So we're looking at, we take the quantitative research and we know what percentage of Calgarians trust the Calgary Police Service and what percent do not. And the percent that trust is very high. But then we are able to take that knowledge and then split people in this qualitative and talk to those who trust and those who don't, and to be able to really get that in-depth understanding. And it's really like best practice research is truly where you're doing both. And that's what the commission is doing. If we just kept doing quantitative research year after year, you wouldn't get the insight and the actionability. But if you just talk to these small numbers, you wouldn't be able to project it. So you do both and you get the right balance for actionability and impact. Angela, is there anything else you would say?
So the only other thing I would say is that qualitative research, as Yvonne has already mentioned, is with a smaller number of people. And when you're doing these in-depth discussions, increasing the numbers to a lot larger actually isn't going to change the themes. What would you call it, Yvonne? Secondary research or research on research is showing that once you get to like 5 interviews, you start to get all of the themes. And the more interviews you have, you're just building and confirming those themes. But you don't need to have 100 in-depth interviews to get to the themes. You can get that with a smaller number of participants, and you're going to get themes that you need to know.
Yeah.
That's helpful to understand. Thank you. And I too am very much looking forward to kind of looking at next steps around this and figuring out how we can get these messages out. There's definitely ways to do that. Okay, thank you.
I'll be a geek. I feel the need to be a geek momentarily here, but actually when you're doing focus group research, which many people will want to, let's have 10 people, let's have 12 in the focus group. Actually, research has shown that 6 attendees is actually the ideal number, because otherwise each person isn't able to have the time in a 2-hour period to be able to actually give their real in-depth reactions. So there's this is best practices. And sorry, I felt the need to nerd out there for just a moment. Now I'll retreat.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the explanation. I appreciate it and appreciate the research. It's very good, having done enough of it in my own past life. It's very helpful, understand all the perspectives and points of view. I think what's gratifying to me is it does reinforce some of the things that this commission has been saying for the last several years around communication. And I will attribute to Commissioner Rosell, who was instrumental in our first 1-page budget summary, which was 3 years ago, I think, where we finally got that going. So, and I will also acknowledge that it takes a ton of work and the service has so many things on its plate. There are so many things out there that this gives another few directions, hints, ideas to go forward. I was down at Acadia Community Association and the CRO was there. And, we had a great conversation, but, that was a group of 10 people. And unless we influence them to tell 10 more people, there's things that we can do and suggest, but we need to keep working on it. So more to come. I look forward to hearing ideas, and I know commissioners would be happy to put our heads together too, in terms of more conversation about what we take away from this research. So thank you again, Yvonne and Angela, much appreciated. And look for further conversations both with the service and the commission as we go forward. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
With that,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yes, you don't need to stay for all our committee reports. There you go. So with that, we have a few more minutes on this part of the agenda before we go to the public session. Sorry, the public participation section. This is public. The item 7, we'll start out with a report from Executive Director Spicer.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing to add to my posted report.
Okay. Any questions for Executive Director Spicer? No. All right. So the next on the list is the Alberta Association of Police Governance. And I don't believe TJ has joined us yet. Commissioner Tsang has not joined us yet. Were there any particular questions on the reports there from both the conference and the resolutions put forward? I think we've been through those a few times. So I will leave that one and move on to Commissioner Siddiqui, Canadian Association for Police Governance.
My report is there, Chair. Happy to answer any questions, but nothing additional.
Any questions for Commissioner Siddiqui? No. The next representative update is my own. I'm a member of the Calgary Police Youth Foundation. I did not have a written report that was submitted in time for this particular meeting. So the Youth Foundation met earlier in June. They're progressing well with their purpose is keeping children and youth safe from crime and victimization. So they're moving ahead with that. The one point I would make is that they developed a program a couple of years ago called ISSP, the Integrated School Support Program, and that was seen to be an excellent program, and the provincial government has provided funds to take that program and expand it to quite a number of communities around the province and fund it from their pockets, which speaks to the excellence of that program. So that's the report from the Youth Foundation. And I'd like to move on then to Commissioner North Pagan. If there's a report from the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team's Civilian Advisory Committee.
Just that we're going ahead with recommendations for our committee to stand with more of an engagement stance with the ALERT annual police plan. So other than that, I can take questions.
Are there any questions? No. All right. And I would just like to comment on my appreciation and gratitude for the people who do serve on these other committees, because it takes time and it's in addition to committee meetings and the rest of the meetings and the readings that we do. So thank you very much to each of you for volunteering to sit on those other committees and boards. So that's the end of the presentations and reports for today. We'll now invite public guests who've registered to speak to do so. Our public participation process is designed to balance the desire to hear from the public with the need to keep meetings at a reasonable length. Those of you who registered to provide presentation will have 4 minutes to speak, followed by commissioners having an opportunity to ask brief clarifying questions. Those who register to ask a question will have 2 minutes to speak, followed by a member of the Commission or Calgary Police Service having 2 minutes to respond. Please keep your comments to the topic you provided when you registered. We also cannot discuss a complaint about any specific employee or interaction with the police. If you'd like to discuss a complaint against an officer or other employee, please contact our public complaint director or the Calgary Police Service Professional Standards section so that it can be properly addressed. I would also like to thank everyone who took time to send us written submissions prior to this meeting. They've been provided to everyone on the commission, and we appreciate your insights. And finally, a reminder to members of the media that we'll hear from the public first, and then we'll hold a media availability for you. So if you could please put through the first speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Our first speaker tonight is Carrie Rutherford, who wants to speak to a video screening that is happening on Friday. You should be able to speak now. Mr. Rutherford, are you there?
I see a mute on your name.
Check one.
There we are. We can hear you now.
Thanks.
Okay. Good. Thank you. First thing I want to do is, as I've done before, is thank the city for keeping this space open for the public voice. I think it's extraordinarily important, both locally and globally, and I just want to express that gratitude as I always do, because I think it's a marvelous thing. There's 3 parts today. Normally we ask questions. Today we're just going to give you some information. First of all, number 1, who am I? So I am the new co-chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Research Action Team Subcommittee of the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good. You've heard from me and others several times before. Personally, I am a settler. My mother's parents met in Toronto after coming here directly from England independently, and my dad's parents are German and Scottish, and they were here a bit longer, but in any event, I'm in the big context a relative newbie here. Part 2. So what is it that we wanted to tell you about? On the 30th of June, we are participating in a panel at the Central Library at 6:30, so that's on Friday. It's a documentary on police oversight and violence called No Visible Trauma. It's a Calgary documentary by Calgarians and about Calgarians, so that's significant for lots of different reasons. We're providing this information here because, frankly, we figured if there's any public watching the police commission events, they would obviously have a vested interest in information on police oversight, etc. So there's that. Part 2 is also the commission members may or may not be informed about this particular documentary. And as I said, Friday the 30th, 6:30, Library Theatre. We're pretty sure the Calgary Police Service knows about the documentary since they're in it, so I'm not worried about informing them per se. The panel, so we're on the panel. The Truth and Reconciliation Research Action Team is one of the panel members, and since I mentioned the commission, Courtney Walcott, former commission member, is also on the panel, as are some members of the documentary creation team. Some of the participants in the documentary will be on the panel. And then, as I mentioned, we have the last spot there. I want to say very strongly, this documentary is not a family event. This is not a documentary you bring your children to see, no matter what you want them to know, unless you want them to be traumatized. It is got graphic violence. In that sense, if you have a triggering by violence, then it's probably not for you as well. As I said, No Visible Trauma, Calgary documentary. If you search that online and you go to their site, they have shorter versions of the documentary, one by the CBC and one that's about half or quarter length, which maybe would be more suitable for you to see if you have that vulnerability. I just want to make that clear. This is, yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thirdly, lastly, so So our colleague, Kainai Elder Doreen Healy, which some of the commission members would recognize, and I know police CPS members Neufeld and McClellan both have had positive interactions with on several occasions. She said recently that she had some concern, and she said, we need to keep talking because we've done good work as the Truth and Reconciliation Research Action Team with the CPS and the CPC. She thought there was maybe some backward steps, but she said, but we're not going anywhere because this stuff needs to be done and we don't want to lose what we've already achieved. And for myself personally, I would agree and say, you know, the communication that we have and some of the questions that we ask are sometimes not so easy, but at least we're talking. And that, above all else, is the most important thing, as I think could be supported by some of the reports that we've been listening to today. And last but not least, regarding the Illumina research and the talk about a bridge, I would be quite willing to be hired on as a bridge. So if you need one, you know how to get a hold of me. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rutherford. I appreciate the comments and the information that you shared with us. It's good to know, and I appreciate your bringing it forward this afternoon. And pleased that you're attending the public session. So that's very helpful. Thank you. And we've taken note, and we'll move on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Chair. Our next speaker is a familiar face. We have Councillor Courtney Walcott, and he would like to ask a question related to the arrest of two individuals this week.
Thanks. Please go ahead, Councillor Walcott.
And hi, everyone. And don't worry, I know the rules about operational requests, so it's a very, very specific one. Protest holds an important place in our society. It's often highlighted injustices that have been baked into the set of common assumptions we hold, and has led to making our laws and behaviors more just and inclusive. Speaking out is not risk-free, however, and those who do protest systems of injustice often become targets themselves because they are perceived to be disruptive. Recently, a Black woman grassroots activist and president of Black Lives Matter Calgary was charged with a hate-motivated crime. The hate-motivated charges against Adora Nwofor were later found to be a clerical error and withdrawn, but not before the headlines had circulated internationally and garnered significant responses, many outright racist, others calling into question an entire movement for justice. While I recognize that Adora faces other charges in relation to her protest actions, the hate-motivated charge stands out as one that both damaged her reputation as an advocate for justice and damaged a movement for justice and equality worldwide. And so an honest question done in good faith is, will CPS consider issuing a public apology in relation to that clerical error due to the high-profile nature of the damage done by doing so?
Thank you. Chief, please go ahead.
Councillor Walcott, thank you for the question. So a little bit delicate. I guess what I would tell you is this, I'll try my best to address a little bit of what you're asking. So the charges that you referenced there, the hate-motivated charges were withdrawn, as you've said. But I guess what I would say right now is the investigation into that particular matter is not closed. There could be further developments in relation to that incident specifically. I would say this, though. The charge that was laid there was definitely laid in error. That was not the appropriate charge. And what I guess maybe we saw is a little bit of the justice system working as intended. So the charge was not the right charge. And so when it went to the Crown, that's an independent set of eyes that looks at it again and basically overlays the lens on whether or not there's it's in the public interest or if there's a reasonable likelihood of conviction. So it was found to not be in a reasonable likelihood of conviction, which was a reasonable conclusion at the time. I guess I would say that, you know, we've probably created some confusion around this because of the clerical error. And then the fact that there's a couple of incidents going on, well, there's two that are quite separate. So I guess what I would say is this, to the extent that we've created confusion by what we did, yes, I would apologize for that for sure. In terms of the specific incident that occurred, the police response to the incident, I think, was quite appropriate based on the information that I have, which is why the matter still continues to be under investigation. So I certainly wouldn't be offering an apology for the police responding to a dispatch call for service to a K-6 school. But at the same time, to the extent that we have created with that error, confusion in the public and any issues for anybody involved, I guess I would say, then yes, we would apologize for that piece. So I'll just leave it at that because of the delicacy of it. But
thank you, Chair. That's our last public speaker. And Chair, you're muted.
Thank you for that, for letting me know. Thank you very much. We appreciate the comments and appreciate the questions. And we'll carry those forward as we carry on with our meeting and other deliberations as we go forward as a full commission. With that, the public participation session is the end of this part of the agenda. And so we'll now adjourn the public portion of this month's commission meeting. And thank you to everyone for coming. Chief Neufeld and I will remain behind to answer questions from the media. Everyone's welcome to stay and watch our media availability, but only recognized members of the media will be able to participate. Commissioners and members of the service participating in camera portion of our meeting will take about a 15-minute break after this portion, and I'll see how long it runs and then determine a time to come back to session. So if you could put through the first question, please.
You bet, Chair. So the first question is coming from Jason Herring at Host Media. Jason, you should be free to talk.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's great. All right. First question, just wanted to go to the preparation for the Calgary Stampede. Wondering what some challenges might have been that you identified from last year's event and in what ways the policing approach might be changing for this year.
Some of the challenges last year were around later in the evening, around closing time. Some disturbances on the Stampede ground, maybe due to alcohol consumption or to grounds, monitoring for offenders, and also the update that we had provided earlier around making sure that there's not over service alcohol.
Sure. All right. And then I'll go to Chief Neufeld for a two-parter just on the policing perception survey. Wondering, were you surprised by any of the insights that were gleaned from this year's survey? And what would your message be to Calgarians who don't have trust in CPS right now on what the service is doing to earn that trust?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I think it's a great question. So I guess I was encouraged to read the report and the survey. The fact that there was alignment between the needs and the perceptions, I think, of the folks who had registered as having high trust in the service and as compared to those who maybe didn't have as high trust. And so the needs and what people were looking for was the same. I think there was very practical recommendations that were offered to the service, along with, I think, the optimism, folks saying, actually, we want more. We actually want more and more frequent communication from the service, and we're open to rebuilding that trust. So I think that's a good message, and I think there's some very practical things around, neighborhood level context in terms of what's going on in the communities, in terms of getting out more face to face. And so as we try to balance, the efficiencies of online reporting and this type of thing, it's a great opportunity to hear back from the community about how they're seeing that, and sometimes these things lead to less face-to-face communication, which actually can be something that can erode trust. So I think there's a lot of good practical things we can take from this, and I just thank Calgarians for offering us the insight.
All right, thanks, folks.
Thank you, Jason. Next, we'll move on to Adam Toy from Global Media. Adam, you should be free to speak.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking my questions. Just wanted to make sure that you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. First question is regarding that trust piece that you were talking about a little bit there, Chief Neufeld. That's a word that has come up in two different parts of or two different sections of this meeting, both with the public perception, but also with regards to hate crimes and reporting hate crimes, et cetera. I'm wondering if that also was something that you clocked, and if you have any thoughts, any further thoughts on trust and how it could help police do their job.
Yeah, I think, Adam, that trust is really the currency of policing, for sure. I mean, we heard that is sort of the core of legitimacy, that people actually perceive the police to be, there to do good and to have good motives and actually to be helpful. I think it's around building relationships. What we're hearing from people is they actually want to have more interactions from the police, and that the interactions that they do have, the positive interactions, are noted, and they want to have more of that. So I think, but with trust, I think it's pretty clear. You see some fluctuation in the surveys, particularly with the environment we've come through in the last few years. So we know that trust isn't something you own; it's leased, and the rent is due every day. And I think increasing those connections with the community will help to ensure we're paying the rent and increasing the trust.
Thanks. Another question for you, Chief, or if Constable Messenger is still there. Wondering if you have any thoughts on the reasons for this increase in hate incidents, hate motivated crimes, what can be done for it, and if there's anything that like what parts of society, if it's there was talk of in-school education, but like is there a space for political leaders? Is there a space for other community groups, religious organizations to help with possibly tamping down on this increase in hate?
Thanks for the question, Adam. I would say hate is everybody's responsibility on that. Can't just be done by the police service alone, which is why we strive on community relationships. It's the only way to really come on it and become aware of it. The more we're out there providing education awareness, the more reports we get. The more people know that the police service is committed to fighting it, so they do trust doesn't come forward to report it, which I think is why we see a spike in hate incidents being reported to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. We don't have any other hands up, so I'll just do one last call for if anyone has any final questions, or if Jason or Adam want another one. Seeing none, Chair, we are done the media availability.